Humanity's Great Sage, Chapter 1, Mining Slave. Lu Yi carried a mining basket on his back and a mining pick in his hand as he walked forward, step by step, inside a dark and damp mining tunnel. The youth had a sorrowful expression on his face, and his eyes were fixed on the empty space in front of him as though he was staring intently at something. To an outsider, there was nothing in front of him. But in reality, the youth could see a translucent shadow in his vision. It looked like the shadow of a tree that was gray and indistinct. He could not get a clear glimpse of it. Nevertheless, he could see that it had lush foliage. The tree branches split off from the tree trunk approximately 1/3 of the way along its length, splitting to the left and the right. They were supporting a semicircular canopy. It had been more than a year since he arrived in this world called Jojo, but he had yet to figure out what that was. All he knew was that if he concentrated hard enough, there was a chance for that shadowy tree to appear in his vision. However, nobody else seemed to notice it. What a depressing life, he sighed. He had suddenly woken up and found himself in this unfamiliar world 1 year ago. Unfortunately, the sect he was staying with had been seized by a gang of thieves before he could familiarize himself with the environment of this world. Many people had been killed during the attack, and he became a prisoner of that gang of thieves along with some other young men and women. They were then sent to this mine to become lowly mining slaves. It wasn't until much later that he learned from the scattered conversations around him that the sect he had previously been staying with was known as Mystical Sky Sect. It was a sect that belonged to the Grand Sky Coalition. Although that sect had an awesome and tyrannical name, it was very small in reality. On the other hand, the sect that attacked Mystical Sky Sect was known as Evil Moon Valley, a sect under the control of Thousand Demon Ridge. Grand Sky Coalition and Thousand Demon Ridge were the two major factions in this world. They were both formed by the union of countless large and small forces that constantly fought against each other with the intention to wipe out the other party. It was said that their battle had been ongoing for several hundred years. In Lu Ye's opinion, the struggle between the two forces was simply a confrontation between the lawful faction and the evil faction. It was also nothing more than an accident that he got dragged into the confrontation. The lands of Jojo had been ravaged by countless wars over the years. Every year, small forces like Mystical Sky Sect would be wiped out completely, but more forces would soon spring forth like bamboo shoots after rain. These forces would occupy various places and make the situation even more chaotic. Oh well. If I am a mining slave, then so be it. Lu Yi comforted himself. Compared to those who were killed, at least I am still alive. It wasn't that he had any special skills or anything that allowed him to survive. It was just that Evil Moon Valley needed people to carry out their miscellaneous chores, and a young person with no cultivation like him was undoubtedly the best choice for that task. In fact, the mining slaves at this mine did not just consist of the members of Mystical Sky Sect but also the disciples of various small clans and sects. Evil Moon Valley was not weak. It had captured many territories over the years, and the original forces in those territories had been wiped out completely. Among those who were defeated, those that were deemed useful had been sent to various places as slaves. None of these people had anything special about them. None of them had been enlightened nor started cultivating, so they were very easy to control. There was a saying in Jojo that went demons who were not enlightened had difficulty taking human form, and humans who were not enlightened had difficulty cultivating. To begin cultivating, one needed to unlock their spiritual points. In other words, only those who managed to unlock their spiritual points had the qualifications to begin cultivating. Enlightenment was not an easy thing to achieve. Only 1 out of 100 people could unlock their spiritual points after undergoing systematic training. That probability might increase somewhat if they came from a cultivation clan or sect and received guidance from their elders. Since Lu Yi could not unlock his spiritual points, he could only earn a living by mining in this dim mining tunnel. Fortunately, it wasn't as if mining slaves had no way out of their predicament. If they could successfully achieve enlightenment and report their achievement to the person in charge, they would receive the opportunity to take an assessment. If they passed the assessment, they could become a disciple of Evil Moon Valley. It was just that very few among the mining slaves could achieve enlightenment. How could they achieve enlightenment when they worked all day long in this dim environment and couldn't even get enough food to eat? That was why almost 99% of the mining slaves were resigned to their fate. They worked themselves to the bone every single day just to get a full meal to eat. Lu Yi did not have any sense of belonging towards Mystical Sky Sect. After all, he had only just arrived in this world when Mystical Sky Sect was destroyed. He didn't even know any of the people in the sect. Be that as it may, he did not want to become a disciple of Evil Moon Valley either. It was not part of the lawful force. Just listening to the name gave him an evil vibe. It was bound to be destroyed sooner or later. Even so, he could not spend his entire life as a mining slave in this place. What kind of life would that be? He was one of the elites of the modern era. If he had no dreams or ambitions, how would he be any different from a piece of salted fish? That was why he had been working hard to achieve enlightenment over the past year. At first, he thought that the shadowy tree only he could see would give him some kind of magical help. Unfortunately, the shadowy tree remained nothing more than a shadow. Forget about helping him out, it even affected his vision occasionally. He strongly suspected that there was something wrong with his eyes. Turning a corner, he saw a faint light in the distance. It was one of the exits of the mining tunnel. He had a good harvest today. If he turned in the ore in his mining basket, he could probably get 3 contribution points. Combined with the contribution points he accumulated over the past few days, he had around 12 points in total. 2 points would be used to exchange for 2 steamed buns, and the remaining 10 points would be just enough for him to redeem 1 Qi blood pill. The Qi blood pill was a very low-grade spirit pill. It was not something that could aid in achieving enlightenment, but an abundance of Qi and blood were required to achieve enlightenment. Although the Qi blood pill was very low-grade, it was extremely suitable for people like him who had yet to achieve enlightenment. The reason why Evil Moon Valley was willing to hand out the Qi blood pill was not out of kindness. It was because they were well versed in the art of manipulating a person's heart. Despite being the cheapest and lower-grade spirit pill, it could make hopeful people work even harder at mining. Lu Yi was a prime example. He worked very hard every single day. Above 100 meters away from the entrance of the mining tunnel, he inadvertently glanced at a certain spot in the front left corner. There was a huge boulder in that spot. He kept walking and continued walking until he was about 35 meters away. Only then did he put down the mining basket on his back, tighten his grip on his mining pick, take out a medium-sized rock from his mining basket, and weighed it in his hands. In the next moment, he suddenly ran toward the boulder, slid sideways as he approached the boulder, and kicked out at the rock wall of the mining tunnel. Then he swooped down from above toward the back of the boulder with the help of the rebounding force from his kick. His movements were as agile as a cheetah's. 2 figures were half-squatting behind the boulder, concealing themselves with the help of the boulder. They did not expect anybody to notice their presence. Hence, it was too late for them to stand up by the time they heard a sound and looked up to see Lu Yi. Under the horrified gazes of those 2, Lu Yi raised his hand and threw the ore in his hand at them. It hit one of them directly on the nose. That person screamed in pain and fell on his back to the ground. Blood flowed freely from his face. Meanwhile, Lu Yi attacked again with the mining pick in his other hand. Before his attack landed on the second person, that person reacted swiftly and turned his head to avoid the attack. However, Lu Yi had already rushed over and followed up his attack with a kick to that person's lower abdomen. An expression of pain flashed across that person's face as he staggered backwards from the kick and slumped to the ground, throwing up bile. Lu Yi strode forward and grabbed the other party by the hair. When he saw the other party's face clearly, he sneered. "I was wondering who it was. It turned out to be you 2 brothers." He knew these 2. They were the disciples of the Lu family clan. After the territory of the Lu family clan was seized by Evil Moon Valley, a few of the younger disciples of the Lu family had been sent here to become mining slaves. Strictly speaking, Lu Yi and the 2 brothers from the Lu family clan were in the same boat. "Didn't I warn you never to let me see you again? I told you I'd kill you the next time I saw you." While speaking, Lu Yi picked up a rock from the ground and viciously brought it smashing down. That blow was very heavy, and second brother Lu let out a groan before collapsing to the ground unconscious. After that, Lu Yi walked toward Big Brother Lu, who had been injured by him previously. Big Brother Lu's forehead was badly injured, and the blood from his injury blurred his vision. When he saw Lu Yi walking toward him through his blurry vision, he was so frightened that he scrambled away in a half-crawl. "Have mercy. We didn't know it was you. We thought it was someone else. Have mercy." The two brothers from the Lu family clan had been sneaking around in front of the exit of the mining tunnel. It was clear that they had been up to no good. These two had been pampered and coddled all their lives prior to their capture by Evil Moon Valley. They refused to endure the hardships even after becoming mining slaves. Unfortunately, the status of mining slaves was extremely low. The people of Evil Moon Valley didn't even consider mining slaves to be human. There was no way to obtain food without the ores to exchange for contribution points. For that reason, these two brothers often hid in one of the mining tunnel's many exits to rob the mining slaves who were alone. Many people had suffered at their hands as a result. Not only would they be robbed of their hard-earned ores of the day, but they would also be beaten half to death. These two had tried to rob Lu Yi not too long ago, but they were no match for him and were taught a harsh lesson instead. Lu Yi never imagined that he would encounter the two brothers again only a few days later. All kinds of people existed in the mines. There were people like the two brothers of the Lu family clan among the mining slaves who were gluttonous and lazy, and then there were also people like Lu Yi who had dreams and ambitions. Over the past year, Lu Yi had been using the contribution points he earned from exchanging ores to redeem Qi blood pills, in addition to ensuring his daily food and clothing necessities. He had probably consumed more than 30 Qi blood pill by now. This had caused his body to be stronger than most mining slaves. Although his physique could not be said to be muscular, the power inherent in his body has already surpassed most ordinary people. Dealing with two gluttonous and lazy mining slaves was naturally not a problem for him. Big brother Lu was still begging for mercy, but Lu Yi simply pretended not to hear anything. Grabbing big brother Lu by the hair, he lifted another rock in his hand and viciously brought it smashing down again. After spending a whole year as a mining slave, he had witnessed countless tragedies. He had long since understood one truth in this world: pity and sympathy were useless in this dog-eat-dog world. It wasn't as though the mining slaves were cordial among themselves. Mining slaves that came from various forces could never truly live together in harmony. Thus, they often came to blows over a good piece of ore. People died in the mining tunnels every single day. One could see piles of bones scattered across the ground at varying intervals. That was because many mining slaves starved to death after being robbed. Big brother Lu fell to the ground. Lu Yi picked up his mining pick and his mining basket. Then he strode toward the exit. He had not killed the brothers from the Lu family clan. It wasn't out of kindness. It was simply because injured mining slaves generally could not survive for long in this place. He had only taken a few steps forward when a person rushed in through the exit in a panic. "Get out of the way," that person shouted. At the same time, a palm struck toward Lu Yi. At that moment, Lu Yi felt his entire body going cold. He had caught a glimpse of a pale blue light flowing through the other party's palm. That was the light of spiritual power. In other words, the person attacking him was a cultivator. Only those who achieved enlightenment were qualified to begin cultivating and be known as a cultivator. A cultivator's spiritual power was an extremely mysterious power. Lu Yi had seen one of Evil Moon Valley's cultivators launching an attack before. Although the power behind that attack had not been much, that man had smashed a piece of or with just a light hit of his palm. It was precisely because Lu Yi had witnessed that strange sight that he made up his mind to unlock his spiritual points and become a cultivator. He also secretly assessed that the weakest cultivator of Evil Moon Valley could easily take down 10 of him. Therefore, he understood that he was in great danger the moment he realized that the person attacking him was a cultivator. At that critical moment of life and death, he forcefully stopped in his tracks and leapt backward abruptly. A numbness spread out from his chest and the sound of bones breaking rang out. He was sent flying and collapsed to the ground with a groan. The severe pain made his head clear up significantly. When he realized he was still alive, he immediately stood back up. "Huh?" The cultivator who attacked seemed a little surprised. Although he had not used his full strength just now, a normal mining slave should not have been able to withstand that attack even though it was just a casual swipe. Borrowing the dim light, he saw the face of the mining slave and blurted out, "Lu Yi?" At this moment, Lu Yi had turned around and was prepared to run away. Upon hearing the voice coming from behind him, he froze in shock. Manager Yang. This cultivator surnamed Yang was a lower manager at the mine. Lu Yi would often deal with him because the redemption of the Qi blood pills was done through him. Therefore, they could be considered rather familiar with each other. Manager Yang had quite a favorable opinion of Lu Yi. Mining slaves like Lu Yi who could bear such hardships yet still work so hard were very rare after all. Nevertheless, there was no special treatment regardless of his positive impression of Lu Yi. As long as Lu Yi did not achieve enlightenment, there would always be an insurmountable gap between ordinary people like him and the cultivators. After recognizing that it was Lu Yi, Manager Yang immediately understood why the other party had not died from his attack. Lu Yi had redeemed many qi blood pills from him over a year. Therefore, Lu Yi's physique was stronger than an ordinary mining slave. Combined with the fact that his attack just now had only been a casual blow with no intention to kill, it was not surprising that the other party managed to survive. Opposite Manager Yang, Lu Yi felt his heart pounding wildly like a drum in his chest. Cultivators of Evil Moon Valley generally did not care about the life and death of the mining slaves. Besides, they were aware of the constant fights between the mining slaves in the mine, and generally turned a blind eye to them, unless it happened right in front of them. Right after he assaulted the two brothers of the Lu family clan and left them lying unconscious on the ground, he had turned around only to receive an attack from Manager Yang. In his opinion, it seemed as though Manager Yang was disciplining him. However, he soon noticed that something was not quite right. Manager Yang had looked panicked when he rushed into the mine. He didn't look like he was trying to help the two brothers of the Lu family clan. While Lu Yi was lost in his thoughts, Manager Yang revealed an expression of pleasant surprise. It was almost as though his encounter with Lu Yi in this place was a good thing. Leaning forward, he reached out and grabbed Lu Yi by the shoulder. "Come with me." Humanity's Great Sage Chapter 2 Cunning. Lu Yi felt himself being grabbed by a powerful grip, and his body involuntarily moved forward. Enduring the pain coming from his chest, he asked Manager Yang, "Where are we going?" "Stop talking nonsense," Manager Yang said viciously. He took several steps forward, then glanced at the mining basket on Lu Yi's back. "Get rid of it." Lu Yi did not dare to refuse. Unbuckling the mining basket, he tossed it to the ground but kept hold of his mining pick. Although Manager Yang glanced at Lu Yi sharply, he didn't say anything else. The deeper they went inside, the further the light behind them got. The lighting in the depths of the mining tunnels was very dim, with only the torches that were placed at every 35 meters or so providing some light. However, the entire mine was riddled with passages and the terrain was extremely complicated. Not every mining tunnel had torches lighting the way. Most of the mining tunnels were shrouded in darkness all year round, and nobody knew where these mining tunnels led. Therefore, it was very easy to lose their way if they did not follow the lighted path when mining in this place. It was easy to imagine what would become of a mining slave with an ordinary constitution if they lost their way in this place. Among the mining slaves, the mining tunnels that were illuminated by torches were known as the lighted paths, and the mining tunnels that were shrouded in darkness all year round were known as the dark paths. Oftentimes, torches would burn out and the lighted paths became dark paths. Mining slaves would then lose their sense of direction and starve to death. It was a common occurrence. As Lu Yi followed Manager Yang deeper into the mining tunnels, he noticed something strange. Manager Yang would occasionally look backward with a nervous expression, as though he was being chased by something dangerous. The way Manager Yang was acting made Lu Yi nervous too. "Lu Yi, do you know any of the dark paths?" Manager Yang suddenly asked. "Yes." Lu Yi nodded. Denying this fact was meaningless in front of Manager Yang. Besides, he was not the only one who had some knowledge of a few dark paths. All the superior mining slaves had explored and became familiar with several dark paths. Although the lighted paths were safe, there were not many spots left that could be mined. On the contrary, quality goods could often be found in the dark paths that were shrouded in various dangers. He was only able to harvest so much every single day by relying on the resource-rich dark paths. How else would he find the extra contribution points to exchange for qi blood pills? That was also the reason why Manager Yang had dragged Lu Yi along with him after recognizing Lu Yi. "Manager Yang, do you want to enter the dark paths?" Lu Yi asked. The fact that Manager Yang had mentioned the dark paths so abruptly gave him some room to make his own conjectures. Manager Yang replied, "Bring me to the most hidden dark path." "Okay, Lu Yi nodded in response. He didn't take more than a few steps when he groaned suddenly and clutched at his chest. The bones in his chest felt a little displaced after he took that attack, and following behind Manager Yang at such a fast pace had given him no chance of respite at all. At this moment, his movements had pulled at his injury. The pain that followed made him double over and a sheen of sweat oozed out of his forehead. Manager Yang glared at Lu Yi in dissatisfaction. Hesitating for a moment, he dug into the cloth bag hanging at his waist, quickly retrieved a round spirit pill about the size of a pea, and handed it to Lu Yi. "Eat this." Lu Yi accepted the spirit pill but could not tell what kind of spirit pill it was. The Qi blood pill was the only spirit pill he had been exposed to in the 1 year he spent in this world. Whereas, the spirit pill he currently held in his hand was clearly different from the Qi blood pill. Under the current circumstances, it probably wasn't harmful seeing as he was still useful to Manager Yang. It was most likely used for healing purposes. Thus he stuffed the spirit pill into his mouth and chewed on it. He instantly regretted his decision so much that even his intestines turned blue. That was because the spirit pill was bitter beyond description. "Why did you chew on it? You should have just swallowed it. This is a healing pill." Manager Yang snapped unkindly. So it really was a spirit pill meant for healing purposes. Lu Ye's expression was scrunched up from the bitterness, but he still needed to express his gratitude. "Thank you, Manager Yang. If you really want to thank me, then hurry up and get a move on." Manager Yang gave Lu Yi a shove. Hence, Lu Yi had no choice but to get his act together and lead the way in front. That spirit pill might have been incredibly bitter, but the effects were surprisingly good. He felt a rush of heat spreading in his lower abdomen not long after consuming it. Following that, the pain coming from his chest injury didn't seem as intense as before. Rather, it became sore and itchy. He couldn't help feeling amazed. Wow! So, it's true that bitter medicine works well after all. Under Lu Ye's lead, the two of them continued to move forward in the crisscrossing paths of the mining tunnels. They occasionally came across some mining slaves that were heading back to the surface, but Manager Yang killed them all without hesitation. Lu Ye's eyelids twitched at the sight. Nevertheless, the suspicion in his heart became clearer. About an hour later, the two of them stopped in front of the entrance to a dark path. Lu Yi was holding a torch in his hands at this point. It was a torch he took from nearby. He said, "Manager Yang, this is the most hidden dark path. Once you go inside, take a left at the first intersection. At the second intersection..." Before he could finish speaking, Manager Yang kicked him inside. "Lead the way." He felt his heart sinking to the bottom of the abyss. He did not wish to continue leading the way. Judging by Manager Yang's actions along the way here, he knew that he would suffer the same tragic ending once he brought Manager Yang to their destination. Unfortunately, his last attempt to escape had failed. Manager Yang clearly had no intention of entering the dark paths alone. It was better to have Lu Yi, who was familiar with the terrain, leading the way than to blindly explore the place on his own. Therefore, Lu Yi had no other option but to continue forward reluctantly. The paths twisted and turned so much that even Manager Yang, who was a cultivator, could barely remember the way back. Another hour or so went by. Then the mining tunnel ended ahead with no other way forward. Lu Yi inserted the torch on a hidden pillar on the rock wall. Manager Yang let out a deep breath of relief and sat on the ground to rest. Turning his head to glance at Lu Yi, he couldn't help laughing. "You truly are capable. I can't believe you even managed to find a place like this." Lu Yi smiled. "It was a stroke of luck." Manager Yang nodded and said nothing more. Lu Yi said, "I'll be taking my leave now, Manager Yang." Manager Yang lifted his gaze slightly and lightly said, "Lu Yi, you are a smart man. Smart men should do smart things." While speaking, he got to his feet again and slowly approached Lu Yi. The flickering light from the torch made his shadow dance like a ghostly figure. Lu Yi panicked. "What do you mean?" Manager Yang sighed. "I guess I might as well explain things to you clearly. The people of Grand Sky Coalition are here. I'm afraid we won't be able to defend the mines for long. I came here to escape from the dangers outside. Although I am very grateful to you for bringing me here, I can't let you go back." Lu Yi backed away slowly. "It's just as I thought. A vague guess had formed in his heart when he saw Manager Yang killing off those mining slaves indiscriminately. Manager Yang was worried that news of him entering the mines would be leaked, so he had to kill anybody and everybody who saw him. On the other hand, the reason he had been so happy to see Lu Yi at the entrance of the mines was that he knew Lu Yi could bring him to a secret place to hide. Even if the people of Grand Sky Coalition took over the mines, it would not be easy to find him if he was hiding in a place like this. There was a high possibility that he could escape this catastrophe alive. It was precisely because Lu Yi was aware of his own situation that he had been trying to get away. But how could he get away if Manager Yang refused to let him leave? Then I'll stay with you and keep you company. I won't leave. He pressed his back against the rock wall. There was nowhere for him to retreat. Manager Yang paused for a moment and seemed to consider the idea seriously. Unfortunately, he soon shook his head. I didn't bring a lot of food with me. I don't know how long I will have to hide in this place either. Although Grand Sky Coalition won't be able to remain here for long, it will take at least a month or two for them to leave. That's such a long time. You will starve to death by then. How can you even keep me company? So I'll give you a quick death as thanks. There was only a distance of 10 meters between them. As soon as the conversation ended, he struck out at Lu Yi with his palm. His cultivation might not be that powerful, but it was still a piece of cake for him to kill an ordinary person like Lu Yi. To his surprise, Lu Yi rushed toward him with the mining pick raised up high and viciously brought it smashing down at his head at the exact moment he launched his attack. Although Lu Yi's ruthlessness and decisiveness surprised him slightly, that was all it was. On the contrary, what happened next shocked him so much that he nearly lost his soul. He suddenly realized that it was difficult to control the spiritual power coming from his spiritual points. It felt as though there was an inexplicable force restricting his spiritual power, and he could only mobilize a small amount of it. In the meantime, the mining pick came smashing down at his head. It was too late for him to avoid the attack, so he could only use the hand he had attacked Lu Yi with to block against the attack. Crack! A crisp sound rang out in the air. The mining pick had landed squarely against his arm and broke his bone. He couldn't help screaming out in pain and shuffling backwards. Having landed a successful blow, Lu Yi felt slightly relieved. It looks like the rumors I heard in the past were true. I still have a chance of surviving this. Even though he had the upper hand, he did not let up on his attacks. He slowly pressed forward, the mining pick in his hand constantly rising and falling in front of him. He actually managed to push Manager Yang so hard that Manager Yang was unable to fight back. Manager Yang might be a cultivator of Evil Moon Valley, but his cultivation was not powerful. That was why he had been assigned to this position of managing the mines, which practically had no obligations to carry out. He rarely fought desperately against anybody in his life. After all, he could simply use his cultivation to deal with the mining slaves. They were like putty in his hands. Be that as it may, he was only slightly stronger than an ordinary person when his cultivation was greatly suppressed, which resulted in him taking a heavy beating upon encountering an opponent as ruthless and cruel as Lu Yi. While avoiding Lu Yi's fierce barrage of attacks, he stuck his hand into the cloth bag hanging at his waist. A moment later, he raised his hand and a cold light flashed. Lu Yi was taken aback. He hurriedly stopped advancing and used his mining pick to defend. That cold light slashed down the front of the mining pick, and the mining pick made of fine iron was cut in half. Looking up, he glanced at Manager Yang's hand only to discover that a long sword had appeared in Manager Yang's hand at some unknown point in time. It was something Manager Yang had retrieved from the cloth bag. Manager Yang swung the sword in his hands threateningly, creating a deterrent that prevented Lu Yi from stepping forward at will. The situation instantly fell into a stalemate. An ordinary person and a cultivator faced each other in the deepest parts of the mining tunnels. The former had a cold and determined expression. On the other hand, the latter was an utter mess and an intense pain was causing his expression to contort in a grimace. A yuan metal force field? Manager Yang shouted through gritted teeth. Only a short while had passed, but he had already figured out why his spiritual power was being suppressed. This place contained large quantities of yuan metal ore. Yuan metal was an extremely rare mineral. When it came to its value, the value of yuan metal was second to none in this entire mine. That was because it was a mineral that was very useful to cultivators. The only downside was that yuan metal had a special characteristic. It would emit an invisible and intangible force field. And this force field would restrict the circulation of all spiritual power within its range. A cultivator's strength would be greatly reduced if he was caught in this force field. Since Manager Yang had limited cultivation, being enveloped by this yuan metal force field caused almost all of his spiritual power to be suppressed. He was reduced from a superior cultivator to an ordinary person in an instant. All of a sudden, he recalled that Lu Yi would occasionally mine some yuan metal over the past year. It was just that other people had mined some too, and it had not been a large amount either, so he did not pay much attention to it. There were all kinds of ores in this mine after all. It would now seem that Lu Yi had always known about this location where a lot of yuan metal was located. Even so, he did not mine it excessively in exchange for contribution points and only mined some occasionally, lest other people covet his secret. It could be seen that he was very calculating. You deceived me. Manager Yang felt like he was about to lose his mind. Now that things had come to this point, how could he not realize that Lu Yi had brought him to this location on purpose? An ordinary person he thought he could kill with ease had turned around and bared their fangs at him. The realization enraged him greatly. Nevertheless, his arm was broken and he was injured in many places. Under these circumstances where he could not bring out his cultivation, he knew he was no match for Lu Yi. Therefore, he immediately took decisive action. He turned around and ran. Upon seeing this scene, Lu Yi instantly had a bad feeling. He only had a little knowledge of the yuan metal force field. He had heard about the special characteristics from a cultivator of Evil Moon Valley, the first time he handed over the yuan metal, so he kept that knowledge in mind. Along the way here, he witnessed the manager killing off the other mining slaves with no mercy. He knew that could only spell trouble for him, so he decided to bring Manager Yang to this place. Before he broke Manager Yang's arm, he had not been certain if the yuan metal force field in this place could limit Manager Yang's power. Fortunately, the heavens were on his side. The yuan metal force field really did hamper Manager Yang's power. Even so, the range of the yuan metal force field was limited. I will die the moment Manager Yang leaves the range of the force field. I cannot let him escape. He steeled his heart, bent down, picked up a fist-sized rock from the ground, and threw it at Manager Yang with all his strength. Manager Yang, who was running away in a panic, never expected Lu Yi to have such an underhanded trick up his sleeves. Consequently, he was hit in the back of the head and stumbled to the ground. Before he could stand up, a whistling sound of something cutting through the wind rang out in his ears. He quickly flipped over and saw Lu Yi rushing forward while slashing at him with the other half of the mining pick that was still in Lu Ye's hands. There was no way to escape this time. At that critical moment of life and death, Manager Yang shouted, "Let's die together." At the same time, he stabbed forward fiercely with the long sword in his hand. In the next moment, his head was smashed in by the mining pick. Lu Yi didn't feel safe enough, so he struck a few more times. It wasn't until he saw the body twitching uncontrollably in front of him that he was convinced that the other party was dead. Then an intense pain came from his thigh. He looked down and saw a long sword stuck in his leg. It was the sword that had been in Manager Yang's hands. It turned out that he had been stabbed at some point in time, but he didn't even notice until now. Throwing the mining pick down, he sat down on the ground heavily, took in huge gulps of air, and appreciated the beauty of life. Humanity's Great Sage, Chapter 3, Enlightenment. Lu Yi did not rest for too long. There was still a sword stuck in his leg, and intense pain was assaulting his nerves. Besides, the spot where he was injured was not good. It would be over if the injury had hit a vital spot. Therefore, he began checking on his wound after a short rest. He reached out to tear open the clothing surrounding his wound. After examining his injuries carefully, he finally breathed out a sigh of relief. The injury might look bad, but it was just a flesh wound. Even so, he did not mindlessly pull out the sword. That was because he would inevitably suffer massive blood loss the moment he pulled out the sword. If he failed to handle things well, he might faint after a short while. First, he tore the clothes he was wearing into long strips of cloth and tied them tightly around his leg, starting from the base of his thigh. Subsequently, He completely stripped away the clothes surrounding the injured area to reveal the location of his wound. After that, he cast his gaze toward the waist area of Manager Yang's corpse. There was a fist-sized cloth bag hanging there. He could recognize that item. It was what cultivators called a storage bag. Both the healing pill Manager Yang had given him previously, and the sword stuck in his leg had been taken out of this storage bag. A cultivator's storage bag generally carried all of their belongings. Hence, he pulled Manager Yang's body over to him and retrieved the storage bag hanging around Manager Yang's waist. He studied the item carefully and was amazed. A large space seemed to be contained inside this small cloth bag, allowing it to store many things inside. He still didn't know much about cultivation-related matters despite being in Zhouzhou for more than a year. But he had heard a lot about the items in the cultivation world. It was said that every cultivator's storage bag had a mysterious and invisible lock on it. This lock could only be unlocked by the cultivator themselves. Even if other people got their hands on the storage bag, they could not open the storage bag easily unless they had special means to break the lock. That kind of lock was known among the cultivators as a restraining lock. Although the storage bag in Lu Ye's hands looked like a cloth bag, it was actually made from the skin of an unknown animal. He secretly prayed in his heart, "Please don't let this storage bag be locked." Opening the bag, he reached his hand inside nervously. Soon, a look of joy spread over his face. This storage bag had not been locked. He could already feel some of the contents inside the storage bag. Thinking about it, it made sense. When Manager Yang was faced with danger, he had hurriedly taken out a longsword from within the storage bag to confront his enemy. At the time, his cultivation had been obstructed by the Yuan metal force field. Where would he find the time or energy to lock his storage bag? "I'm saved." Lu Yi calmed down considerably and kept taking out the contents of the storage bag. He was looking for the Qi blood pill, as well as the healing pill Manager Yang had given to him before. After pulling out the sword later, he would surely suffer from blood loss. He could lessen the dangers if he could use the Qi blood pill to replenish his Qi and blood. In addition, the healing pill was undoubtedly an excellent item that would also be suitable for the current circumstances. Soon a messy pile of stuff formed next to him. There were bottles and jars, tons of food, a few large water sacks, some books, and even some toilet paper. He couldn't help feeling rather speechless. However, there was nothing wrong with bringing some extra items considering Manager Yang had escaped to this place to seek refuge from the dangers outside. He searched through the bottles and quickly found the Qi blood pills and healing pills that he needed. There were many of the Qi blood pills. There were as many as 10 bottles, and each bottle contained 20 to 30 pills. Meanwhile, there was only one bottle of healing pills with 7 or 8 left inside. Manager Yang had been in charge of providing Qi blood pills to the mining slaves in exchange for contribution points, so it was only natural for him to carry around large quantities of Qi blood pills. This made Lu Yi extremely happy. In the past, he needed 10 contribution points just to obtain 1 Qi blood pill. He only managed to obtain 30 pills over the course of a year. On the other hand, he instantly received 200 to 300 of those Qi blood pills all at once just by killing Manager Yang. "I'm rich." He took out a Qi blood pill and prepared to consume it. Pondering for a moment, he added 2 more pills and stuffed them into his mouth. It wasn't that he didn't want to eat more of them, but that it was pointless to eat so many of them in one go. Then he took out the healing pills and swallowed one. Immediately after that, he grabbed one of the large water sacks, untied the mouth of the bag, gulped down a few mouthfuls, and used the clean water to wash his wound. A slightly chilly feeling spread across his wound. Although the water agitated his injury, it also brought about a bit of coolness at the same time. His forehead oozed with sweat. When he finished cleaning his wound, he took out another healing pill and set it aside for later use. He had done what he needed to do. Taking a deep breath, he wrapped his hands around the hilt of the sword and yanked it out abruptly. At that moment, his entire body shuddered in response. Nevertheless, he gritted his teeth and did not make a single sound. He had no time for delays. He swiftly picked up the healing pill he had set aside earlier, crushed it into powder in his hands, and scattered the powder on his wound. Healing pills could be consumed directly, but he did not know whether it had any effect if used externally. Thus he could only give it a try. Untying the clothes tied around the base of his thigh, he bandaged his wound properly. After all his efforts, He was practically soaked in sweat. He lay down directly on the ground and didn't feel like moving in the slightest as he gradually lost consciousness. He did not know how long had passed by the time he woke up again. He struggled to sit up and leaned against the rock wall. Then he lifted a hand and pressed the area around the injury on his leg. Although it hurt, there was no inflammation. That was a good thing. It would seem that both consuming the healing pill and applying it externally had worked. The most dangerous period was over, and he finally relaxed slightly. A rumbling sound came from his stomach. Before encountering Manager Yang, he had not eaten anything for more than half a day. He planned to exchange his contribution points for some food after turning in the ores he had harvested. Who could have known that Manager Yang would force him to enter the depths of the mining tunnels? Afterwards, he even fought a deadly battle with Manager Yang, and was wounded in the end. Fortunately, he found a lot of food in Manager Yang's storage bag. Taking out a piece of dried meat, he ate it with some water to wash it down. His hunger slowly faded. Since this place was practically inaccessible and he was safe for the time being, he gradually began showing interest in the items Manager Yang left behind. While eating, he rifled through the items he had taken out of Manager Yang's storage bag. He could recognize the chi blood pills and healing pills. However, there were some spirit pills that he had never seen before. He had no idea what they were used for. Moreover, some of those spirit pills were exuding a pungent spell. It was obviously something nasty. Putting those spirit pills aside, Lu Yi casually picked up a book and flipped through it under the flickering torchlight. The contents of the book instantly enraptured him. It would seem that Manager Yang had been a rather passionate man. That book wasn't just rich in content, but it was also rich in pictures. He did not know who had drawn those pictures, but those pictures were incredibly skillful. They were very detailed and lifelike. His physical condition was very weak at the moment. It was not a suitable time to read this kind of erotic content. Thus, he tossed it to the side and picked up another book. This book contained words on the cover. Reading the title, it turned out to be a biography of a sword saint. That aroused his interest, so he read a few pages of it only to discover that it was a storybook. Tossing that book to the side, he picked up the third book. When he read the title on the cover, his heart skipped a beat. The Golden Liberation Technique? He hurriedly flipped through it, and his expression became increasingly excited. It was a book on cultivation techniques. It was similar to the first book. It was filled with pictures and texts, which were very easy to understand. From the looks of it, it seemed to be the cultivation technique that Manager Yang had been cultivating. Following his excitement, he suddenly realized a very real problem. He had yet to unlock his spiritual points. Even with a cultivation technique placed right in front of him, it was completely useless to him. He sighed softly and placed the Golden Liberation Technique down. Since he couldn't cultivate it, there was no point in reading it any further. He had tried unlocking his spiritual points over the course of the year, but his efforts had proven fruitless so far. After a moment of depression, he picked up Manager Yang's storage bag again. There were still some items inside that he had not taken out yet. Reaching his hand into the bag, he took out the items one by one. He did not find anything else that seemed valuable, but there were many rare ores. Among those rare ores were several fist-sized pieces of yuan metal. These were probably the ores that Manager Yang had secretly stashed away. Who knows what he had planned to do with them? Lu Yi had mined a lot of rare minerals after mining in this place for a year, so he had seen most of these ores before. Even if he didn't know what they were called or what they were used for, he had seen them all before. That was until he took out a dark red piece of, or that was the size of a person's head. He had never seen something like this before, and he did not know which mining slave had mined this piece of ore either. In the end, it had eventually ended up in Manager Yang's possession. It was a bit strange, but most items were valuable precisely because they were rare. Something even he had never seen before must be of great value. Just as he was about to put down that ore, he felt his psyche becoming disoriented for a moment. Immediately after that, a blurry shadow appeared in front of him and transformed into a tree. It was that shadowy tree. He was greatly astonished. There was one condition for the shadowy tree to appear, the condition being that he needed to focus. Moreover, it did not appear every time. Sometimes it would appear, sometimes it wouldn't. But the shadowy tree had shown up all by itself this time. While he was trying to make sense of the situation, that vague shadowy tree suddenly grew roots, and those tree roots then plunged into the dark red ore in his hand. In the next moment, a cracking sound rang out and the ore split into two. An orange-yellow light entered his vision, frightening him out of his wits. That was because the ore had cracked open to reveal a fire inside. He subconsciously tried to throw the ball of fire away, but that fire was stuck to his hands. He could not get it off his hands no matter how he wrung his hands. In that short moment of panic, he suddenly realized that the changes in the dark red ore were probably related to the appearance of the shadowy tree. What amazed him even more was that he didn't feel any sensation of being burned. Meanwhile, the orange-yellow flame was shrinking rapidly as if it was being absorbed by something. In just a few moments, that ball of fire vanished before his very eyes. He was still caught up in his astonishment when a scorching force surged up from his dantian. That force drew upon the strength of his chi and blood, converging toward that location. An unspeakable pain followed. He suddenly felt a tremendous force stirring in his lower abdomen, almost as if it was going to rip him apart completely. He couldn't help groaning in pain, and his clothes were instantly soaked in sweat. Just when he thought he was going to die, a soft sound came from his lower abdomen. He could sense that something had been broken at that moment. The pain quickly disappeared. At the same time, the world in Luye's eyes underwent a wondrous change. A strange and surreal feeling bloomed in him. He could distinctly sense a mysterious power gathering around his dantian in his lower abdomen. Then, a wave of overwhelming surprise washed over him. He had unlocked his spiritual points. Humanity's Great Sage Chapter 4 Skill Tree. Amidst the crackling sounds, the weak flame flickered and finally died out. The torch inserted in the hidden pillar had burned out. Although the hidden mining tunnel was plunged into darkness, Lu Yi did not lose his sight completely. His surroundings that should have been completely filled with a pitch-black darkness still contained some faint light in his vision. He could see the outline of Manager Yang's corpse not far away, as well as the cold light coming from the sword he had previously tossed aside. It wasn't that the mining tunnel wasn't dark. It was simply that his eyesight had improved. After unlocking his spiritual points, he could clearly feel that his body had undergone some mysterious changes. Even his body that was weakened by injury had given birth to a lot of strength. Ha ha, ha ha, ha 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 ha, he burst into wild laughter. His maniacal laughter echoed in this confined and enclosed environment. It wasn't until his movements pulled at his injury that he hurriedly stopped laughing. Suppressing the joy in his heart, he thought back on the changes just now. He was certain that his sudden enlightenment was related to the shadowy tree. It was also related to that piece of dark red ore that he had never seen before. No, the ore is not the key. The key lies in that ball of orange-yellow flame inside the ore. When the shadowy tree grew tree roots and devoured that flame, he had achieved enlightenment as a result. However, the shadowy tree had never experienced such changes before. The changes were probably caused by the stimulation of that orange-yellow flame. It would seem that his previous conjecture had been correct. That shadowy tree was indeed capable of helping him out in mysterious ways. It was just that he had failed to find the right method all this time. Sorting out his thoughts, he quickly focused his mind. He wanted to see how the shadowy tree looked now. The shadowy tree had absorbed that orange-yellow flame. There must be some changes to it anyhow. Perhaps it was because he was too emotional, but even though he tried to concentrate, he could not detect that shadowy tree again. Similar situations often happened in the past, and the cause was always a lack of concentration. He took several deep breaths and calmed down. Then he tried again after waiting for some time. This time around, the shadowy tree successfully reappeared in his vision. Sure enough, it was just as he thought. The originally gray and blurry shadowy tree had undergone some changes. In general, the shadowy tree had the same appearance as before. The tree roots that grew out previously were nowhere to be seen. The only difference was a single leaf shrouded in blazing fire near the bottom of the canopy. It looked as if it was on fire. Lu Yi focused his attention and fixed his gaze on that burning leaf. He could vaguely make out a very complicated and intricate pattern imprinted on the leaf. Concentrating hard, he tried to see the pattern clearly. All of a sudden, an unexpected change occurred. That small leaf was repeatedly magnified in front of his eyes until it obstructed his vision in an instant. At the same time, a large amount of inexplicable information flooded into his mind unchecked. He suddenly felt as though somebody had smashed his head in with a large sledgehammer. He didn't even manage to make a single sound before passing out. When he regained consciousness again, he felt extremely dizzy. Moreover, his head was about to split open from the pain. He shook his head slightly, gritted his teeth, and sat up with his back leaning against the rock wall. He thought back on what happened before he lost consciousness, and was surprised to discover that his head was filled with all sorts of information that he had never seen before. Furthermore, this information was ingrained so deeply that it felt like they were his own memories. Gathering his composure, he carefully went over these memories that should never have existed and quickly understood the whole story. The cause was still the shadowy tree. After devouring that orange-yellow flame, a burning leaf appeared on the shadowy tree as a result. That leaf had a mysterious pattern on it, which contained large quantities of magical knowledge. Thus, that knowledge was forcibly downloaded into his mind when he studied the leaf carefully. Sharp edge. That was the information contained in the leaf. It was a spiritual pattern called sharp edge. He had heard of spiritual patterns before. It was something that contained mysterious power. In addition, it was closely related to the life, cultivation, and battle of the cultivators. There seemed to be people who specialized in studying spiritual patterns and were known as spiritual pattern masters. It was just that researching spiritual patterns was not easy, so there were very few of them. After understanding this, he tried to mobilize the spiritual power in his spiritual point. However, he found that the spiritual power in his spiritual point was so heavy that he couldn't mobilize it at all. Mulling over it for a moment, he recalled that he was still being enveloped in the Yuan metal force field. How could it be easy to mobilize his spiritual power? Even Manager Yang had died in his hands because of this reason. He stood up and hobbled into the distance. While walking, he tested the reaction of his spiritual power in his spiritual point. It wasn't until he could mobilize his spiritual power that he stopped walking. This position was outside the range of the Yuan metal force field. The spiritual power that felt so heavy just now became incredibly active. With a little directive from him, it flowed throughout his body. The places where it flowed felt warm and comfortable. He had never had such an experience before, and was extremely amazed as a result. After fooling around for a bit, he remembered the spiritual pattern. It was practically instinctive. He poured his spiritual power into his palm and a brilliant light flashed on the palm of his hand in an instant. Although it only lasted for a fleeting moment, he saw it clearly. That light was an extremely complicated and intricate pattern. It was the exact same pattern as the one on the burning leaf. This is sharp edge? He looked down at his palm. Logically speaking, he had just unlocked his spiritual point. He barely even knew how to use his spiritual power, let alone use his spiritual power to construct a spiritual pattern. Nevertheless, he managed to succeed in doing just that so easily as though he had practiced countless times before. The palm of his hand was glowing faintly like an enormous firefly. Moreover, bursts of tingling pain came from his palm, making him feel as though there were many needles piercing into his flesh. It was just a single palm, and yet that palm gave off an extremely sharp vibe. He felt like he could split a stone into two with a single palm strike. When that thought crossed his mind, he immediately dragged a rock the size of a small basin over to him. This kind of rock could be found anywhere in the mine. It had no value whatsoever. Placing the rock in front of him, he raised his palm and chopped down on the rock. That rock the size of a small basin cracked down the middle with a loud sound. The incision down the middle was neat and tidy. He was stunned. The thought that he could split a stone with his bare hands had crossed his mind just now, but he never thought that it would have such an effect. This isn't splitting. This is slicing. And the thing that sliced this rock in half was my hand. All of this could only be done with the enchantment from Sharp Edge. This spiritual pattern seemed to work by making the enchanted object incredibly sharp. I once watched a cultivator from Evil Moon Valley smash a rock with his hand and was greatly shocked at the time. From the looks of things, I seem to have gained the ability to do that too. What's more, I can do it better. This is just slicing rocks. What if I sliced a human? The light shining from his palm slowly began to fade after he sliced through the rock. It was caused by exhaustion of spiritual power. At the same time, he felt as though his body was completely empty, and an infinite sense of weakness washed over him. His mind had been broken. Despite having just attained enlightenment, he formed a spiritual pattern in a moment of insatiable curiosity, and went way beyond his limits. Thus, he was experiencing a serious overuse of power. A wave of fatigue struck him. He tried to endure it. If he fell asleep at a time like this, he wasn't sure if he could wake up again. Hurrying back to the place from before, he picked up a bottle of qi blood pills, took out a few and stuffed them into his mouth. Then, he picked up another piece of meat and forced himself to take large bites out of it. As the qi blood pills came into effect, it gradually filled his entire body with energy, and the feeling of weakness slowly subsided. Leaning back against the rock wall, he sorted out his thoughts. After the shadowy tree that had been accompanying him for more than a year devoured that ball of orange-yellow flame, he unlocked his spiritual points and became a cultivator. Subsequently, he discovered a burning leaf when he was checking the shadowy tree for changes, and obtained the spiritual pattern, sharp edge, from that burning leaf. At this moment, Lu Yi couldn't help feeling a strong sense of déjà vu when he looked at the shadowy tree again. He pondered in silence for a moment and the realization suddenly dawned on him. Isn't this a skill tree? Humanity's Great Sage Chapter 5 Plan. If a single leaf on the skill tree contains a spiritual pattern like sharp edge, then what about the other leaves? Will they also contain other spiritual patterns? If I can light up more leaves, then won't I be able to obtain even more knowledge on spiritual patterns? Thinking about the huge canopy and the countless leaves hanging from the skill tree, Lu Yi couldn't help feeling fired up. How can I light up the other leaves? He had a few vague guesses in his heart, but there was no way to confirm those conjectures right now. He could only wait until an opportunity arose in the future to confirm those ideas. All he could do right now was to unlock even more spiritual points as soon as possible to increase his cultivation. The first spiritual point all cultivators would unlock was the spiritual point located at their dantian. This was the starting point of one's cultivation, known as the source spiritual point. How the rest of the spiritual points would be unlocked afterward would depend on the kind of cultivation techniques cultivated by the respective cultivators. Different cultivation techniques would unlock spiritual points at different locations. The more spiritual points they unlocked, the higher their cultivation. The golden liberation technique will come in handy now. He quietly quelled his excitement a little. Picking up Manager Yang's storage bag, he began packing up the stuff. It wasn't until this moment that he realized, to his astonishment, that his palm engraved with the sharp edge earlier was riddled with holes. It looked like it had been pierced by countless needles and had bled out quite a bit. Caught up in his excitement, he had not felt anything until now. However, a constant throbbing pain agitated his nerves now that he finally noticed the injury. Thus, he quietly reflected on his actions. It looks like if I ever obtain any other spiritual patterns in the future, I must not use it on my own body so carelessly. He soon packed up all the things he took out before and moved away from the range of the Yuan metal force field. At present, Lu Yi had two options laid out in front of him. The first was to leave the mine. The reason Manager Yang entered the mine was to escape from the dangers outside. The people from Grand Sky Coalition had attacked this place and there was no way the forces of Evil Moon Valley stationed at this mine could defend this place, so he chose to hide away in advance. After all, it would surely bode ill for him due to his status as a disciple of Evil Moon Valley if the mine was seized by the opposing party. If I can meet up with the cultivators of Grand Sky Coalition, I will be able to escape from this sea of suffering. I will no longer need to remain in this place and be oppressed again in the future. Unfortunately, that was not a wise choice. Manager Yang had escaped into the mine after receiving news of the impending attack. Similarly, there would surely be other disciples of Evil Moon Valley who had entered the mine too. That would mean the current period was the most chaotic period. It would be best if he could successfully get out of the mine. However, if he accidentally ran into any of the other disciples of Evil Moon Valley who had escaped into the mine, he would surely end up with the same fate as those mining slaves that Manager Yang had indiscriminately killed previously. Therefore, he chose the second option. He was going to stay put and remain here for the time being. This place was extremely hidden. Most people would not be able to enter this place. Moreover, it was easy to attack and defend. If any of the disciples of Evil Moon Valley managed to accidentally barge into this place, he could borrow the power of the Yuan Metal Force field to ambush his opponents. That would give him some chance of fighting back. Besides, his injury had yet to heal, and it was difficult for him to move around. He recalled the words Manager Yang had mentioned before. If he remembered correctly, Manager Yang had said something along these lines: "The people of Grand Sky Coalition are here. We won't be able to defend the mines for long. Grand Sky Coalition won't be able to remain here for long, but it will still take them at least a month or two to leave." The meaning behind these words was very obvious. Manager Yang had been certain that even if Grand Sky Coalition managed to capture this place, they could not keep this mine in their possession for long. For that reason, they would leave this place in a month or two. Control over the mine would then fall back into Evil Moon Valley's hands. Putting together all the information he had at the moment, Lu Yi concocted a plan in his heart. He planned to stay here to recuperate and cultivate. Then, he would leave the mine within a month to look for the people of Grand Sky Coalition to remove himself from this sea of suffering. He felt a lot more at ease after making up his mind. The most difficult time of his life was over. Now that he had successfully unlocked his spiritual point, and there was a skill tree growing by his side, his future was bright and vast. There was no need to rush right now. Once he found a suitable location, he brought out some bedding from Manager Yang's storage bag, spread it out on the ground, sat on it quietly, and took out the book titled Golden Liberation Technique to study it carefully. The mining tunnel was filled with pitch-black darkness. Fortunately, he had successfully achieved enlightenment. Otherwise, he would not have been able to see anything. He soon discovered something interesting. If he gathered his spiritual power around his eyes, the things he saw would become a little clearer. It was a pity that he had only unlocked his source spiritual point, so his spiritual power was very limited and could not be maintained for a long time. He ate when he was hungry and slept when he was sleepy. Aside from the slightly lacking environment, there was nothing else he had to complain about. In any case, he was currently immersed in the excitement of unlocking his first spiritual point. He did not have many requirements for the environment he was living in. There was no way to calculate how much time had passed, so he didn't know how much time had passed. He could only guess that several days had passed. The injuries on his leg and his hand had almost healed completely. Since unlocking his spiritual point and becoming a cultivator, it would seem that his physical fitness had improved significantly. If he was stabbed in the leg in the past, he would have needed more than 10 days of recuperation before he could even walk around. Of course, it could also be related to the fact that he was consuming the Qi blood pills every single day. After studying the Golden Liberation Technique, he discovered that he could not use the cultivation technique for the time being. It wasn't because there was something wrong with the cultivation technique. It was simply that he had only just unlocked his source spiritual point. There were other conditions that needed to be met if he wanted to unlock his next spiritual point. If the spiritual points were compared to a lake in a cultivator's body, then the water in the lake was the cultivator's spiritual power. Therefore, the more spiritual points a cultivator unlocked, the greater the spiritual power contained in their body. Unfortunately, the prerequisite to unlocking the next spiritual point was that the previous spiritual point had reached its full potential. To put it simply, it required his spiritual power to fill his spiritual point to the brim. In his case, what he needed to do right now was to continue cultivating. He had to strengthen and accumulate his spiritual power in his source spiritual point. When his spiritual power filled his source spiritual point to the brim, he would finally be able to unlock his next spiritual point. Only then would he need to use the Golden Liberation Technique. There were several ways to strengthen one's spiritual power. The most common method was to consume spirit pills for cultivation purposes. Spirit pills could transform into spiritual power and charge up a cultivator's spiritual points. The second method was to absorb spiritual qi. Spiritual qi existed in any environment. It was only a matter of how much could be found in any environment. Once a cultivator unlocked their spiritual points, they could sense the existence of the spiritual qi. They could take the spiritual qi into their body and refine it to strengthen their cultivation. The third method was to use spirit stones. That was something he had only heard of before but never saw for himself. The last method was to refine one's vitality into qi. A cultivator could also achieve the purpose of cultivation by first strengthening their own vitality, and then refining that vitality into spiritual power. These methods had their own advantages and disadvantages. It could not be generalized. Lu Yi had never joined the ranks of the cultivators before. Nevertheless, he often heard the other mind slaves talking about cultivation matters. Everybody would talk about these topics with a great yearning, hoping that they would one day be able to make it big and change their fate. He had picked up some of the talk, so he understood a little of the basics. In his current circumstances, he could not use the first method. He did not have any spirit pills for cultivation. Although he was certain there were some in Manager Yang's storage bag, there were so many bottles and jars. He had no way to differentiate between them, and did not dare to experiment rashly. Meanwhile, he had tried the second method. He did not know if it was due to the presence of the Yuan metal force field or some other reason. In any case, he could not sense the existence of spiritual qi, and could not absorb it as a result. The only method he could use was refining his vitality into qi. Humanity's Great Sage, Chapter 6, Encounter. Consuming qi blood pills could strengthen one's vitality. One could then obtain more spiritual power by using one's spiritual power in their spiritual points to refine their vitality. At the moment, that was the only method that Lu Yi could use to cultivate with the benefits he obtained from the personal effects of Manager Yang. He had tallied the number of qi blood pills previously. There were a total of 253 qi blood pills, which was not a small number. He originally thought that so many qi blood pills would be enough for his use. However, he only just discovered that these qi blood pills would not last long once he actually started cultivating. The first time he cultivated, he only managed to refine the medicinal efficacies of 2 qi blood pills. He had never done this before, so it took him a long time to figure out how to refine his vitality into qi. During his second attempt, he managed to refine 4 qi blood pills. He was starting to get the hang of it after some practice. The third time he refined 6 qi blood pills. The fourth time he refined 10 qi blood pills. The more he cultivated, the faster his consumption of the qi blood pills. That was because the spiritual power in his spiritual point was increasing by the day. The more spiritual power he had, the higher his efficiency in refining his vitality into qi, and the greater his consumption of qi blood pills. He finally understood one thing. The qi blood pills were truly nothing great after all. Otherwise, there was no reason for a newly enlightened cultivator like him to consume those pills so quickly. A true cultivator most likely had some special spirit pills for cultivation while cultivating. It was a pity he could not recognize any of those spirit pills and did not dare to try them out recklessly. The mine was dank and gloomy. He did not know how much time had passed. When he finished consuming all the qi blood pills in his possession, he knew that it was time for him to leave. It wasn't because he had run out of cultivation resources. It was because he had nothing left to eat. Since he started refining his vitality into qi, his appetite had increased greatly. Manager Yang had brought a lot of food with him. If he had rationed the food carefully, it could have lasted him for 2 months. He planned to hide here for quite some time after all. How could he be inadequately prepared? Although there was no way for him to calculate time accurately, he estimated that more than a dozen days had passed since he started cultivating. The benefits he gained from this period of cultivation were not great but not small either. The spiritual power in his source spiritual point had been filled to the brim. In other words, he had the qualifications to unlock his next spiritual point and cultivate the golden liberation technique. It was just that when he tried to unlock his second spiritual point according to the guide written in the golden liberation technique, he could not find the right location. Not only did he fail in his cultivation, but he also wasted a lot of spiritual power for no reason. No wonder I heard people saying that cultivation matters require the guidance of their elders. Who knows how many detours I will need to take before I can figure things out myself. For that reason, he was still just a cultivator who had only unlocked his first spiritual point despite consuming all the qi blood pills in his possession. The injuries on his body had healed completely, so they did not hinder his movements. Rather, he was troubled over how he was going to deal with Manager Yang's storage bag. He was quite reluctant to leave it here. It was everything Manager Yang had owned after all. Leaving aside the other items, some of those rare ores were very valuable. He had no family nor friends in this world or any elders to take care of him. He would surely need to consume many resources in the future. With Manager Yang's personal effects in his possession, at the very least, he would not need to worry about a lack of cultivation resources for the time being. Nevertheless, it was not appropriate to carry this storage bag on him either. This was the cultivation world. Fortune begot greed, and it was not uncommon for killings to take place. If a cultivator who had only unlocked a single spiritual point like himself carried such a precious storage bag around, it was hard to guarantee that others would not mean him harm when they saw the storage bag. After considering it for some time, he decided to bring the storage bag along with him. Wealth always came with danger. If he missed this opportunity, he might never come across another chance to obtain such windfall again. Once he made up his mind, he returned to the place where he killed Manager Yang before, and picked up his mining pick that had been cut in half. Since he had decided to bring the storage bag along with him, he could not leave the yuan metal in this place behind. These ores were very valuable after all. Raising his mining pick again, he began sweating profusely like rain. He had been mining for more than a year now, so he had long gotten familiar with the work. Moreover, he was much more efficient than before now that he had a foundation of spiritual power. He mined the yuan metal, piece after piece, and stored them into the storage bag. It wasn't until he finished mining all of the yuan metal in this place that he finally tossed the mining pick aside. If everything goes smoothly, I will never need to use this ever again. Afterward, he took off his clothes, placed the storage bag close to his body, and tied it to his body with strips of cloth. By doing it this way, the storage bag would not be exposed unless he was stripped and searched. However, he took out the longsword that belonged to Manager Yang in advance. His journey might not be safe, and having a weapon at hand would allow him to respond to an emergency. When everything was prepared, Lu Yi took a deep breath and followed the route in his memory toward the outside. He was very cautious along the way. Scared that a cultivator from Evil Moon Valley would pop out of the shadows, he did not dare to go too far lest he revealed his whereabouts. Unfortunately, the more afraid one was, the more likely that fear would come true. When he rounded a corner in the dark and entered a mining tunnel, his figure suddenly froze in place. Not far ahead, a figure was leaning with his back against the rock wall of the mining tunnel and panting lightly. Moreover, there was a faint smell of blood in the air. Lu Yi was just about to retreat, but it was too late. That person turned to look in Lu Yi's direction and immediately exclaimed in surprise, "Lu Yi?" Lu Yi instantly felt his heart clenching in fear. The fact that his face could be seen in this darkness indicated that that person was a cultivator. Furthermore, a person that could recognize him could only be one of the cultivators of Evil Moon Valley. Sure enough, if Manager Yang would think of taking refuge in the mine, then so would the other cultivators of Evil Moon Valley. Who knew how many people from Evil Moon Valley were currently hidden inside the mine? The gears in his head spun quickly. He gathered his spiritual power in his eyes and finally saw the other party's face clearly. It was one of the cultivators in the mine named Zhou Cheng. Zhou Cheng worked under Manager Yang and had a lower status than Manager Yang. His cultivation was probably weaker than Manager Yang's too. In addition, he seemed to be injured. The smell of blood was coming from his body. "Come here." Zhou Cheng lowered his voice and called out to Lu Yi. "Okay." Lu Yi immediately responded. He strode forward toward Zhou Cheng, his speed increasing as he walked. Zhou Cheng immediately sensed that something was amiss. The main reason was that Lu Yi was holding a sword in his hands. Thus he frowned. "Where did you get that sword?" That sword looked like the sword given to all the cultivators of Evil Moon Valley. It was very problematic for Lu Yi to be having it in his possession. Lu Yi did not respond. He was only 10 meters away from Zhou Cheng at this point. Zhou Cheng finally noticed the killing intent coming from Lu Yi. Hence, he hurriedly got to his feet and shouted through gritted teeth, "I'm going to kill you, you little cur." With that said, he raised his sword and stabbed toward Lu Yi. That long sword was imbued with spiritual power. In the dark, it glowed with a bright light. That sword wasn't anything special. It was just that pouring spiritual power into the long sword increased the damage it inflicted. With an ordinary person like Lu Yi as his opponent, It was only natural that he believed it to be more than enough to get rid of Lu Yi. The last person who thought that way was Manager Yang, and his corpse had already begun to rot. Meanwhile, the sword light rapidly expanded in Lu Ye's vision. He directed all his spiritual power to gather around his eyes, and the entire world seemed to slow down significantly. It was different from the time he borrowed the power of the Yuan metal force field to ambush Manager Yang. This was the first time he was fighting against another cultivator in a direct confrontation. Therefore, he could not afford to hesitate or falter in the slightest. Fortunately, this cultivator's cultivation was not that powerful. He was also heavily injured, which was why Lu Yi dared to go in for the kill. When that longsword was about to hit him, he slid sideways and dodged the attack by a hair. Then, he raised the longsword in his hand and countered. At the same time, a mysterious and complicated pattern flashed across the longsword. It was the blessing of sharp edge. Humanity's Great Sage Chapter 7. Escaping the Sea of Suffering. Lu Yi did not know how powerful Zhou Cheng's cultivation was, but it was ultimately much stronger than his. Even if Zhou Cheng was injured, it was still impossible for a newly enlightened cultivator like Lu Yi to haphazardly fight him. Besides, the intent to kill could only be executed when accompanied by the corresponding methods. Sharp edge was Lu Ye's means to do so. When Lu Yi had nothing better to do before, he had tried experimenting with a few things. He discovered that the spiritual pattern sharp edge could not only be applied to his palm but also to weapons. Moreover, it was much more effective. The light that blazed out for an instant caused Zhou Cheng to blank out in confusion. When did Lu Yi become a cultivator? The two swords clashed against each other, accompanied by a loud sound of metal breaking. He was shocked to discover that his long sword had been cut in half. This situation frightened him very much. Having his weapon broken in front of his enemy was undoubtedly a huge mental blow. While Zhou Cheng was frozen in shock, Lu Yi followed up with a second attack. After breaking Zhou Cheng's sword, he immediately lifted his sword and slashed at Zhou Cheng's neck. He did not know any forms of swordsmanship nor any mysterious moves, so he could only use the crudest slashing movements. Zhou Cheng was scared out of his wits. At this moment they were too close to each other and it was too late for him to dodge backward. Thus, he could only call upon what little spiritual power that remained in his body to protect himself. Logically speaking, his cultivation should have been enough to withstand the attack of a cultivator like Lu Yi, who had only unlocked one spiritual point. Even if the other party held a weapon, the attack should not be able to pass through his spiritual power's defenses. Contrary to his expectations, the protection formed from his spiritual power did not display the effect it should have when that long sword came slashing down. The long sword sliced through that layer of protection and subsequently slashed across his neck. The sound of a sharp weapon slicing through flesh rang out, and Lu Yi felt several drops of warm blood splattering across his face. "You bastard!" Zhou Cheng was livid. He couldn't believe a mining slave had injured him so in a moment of carelessness. Lifting his hand, he struck toward Lu Yi. However, Lu Yi had already released his grip on the longsword and turned around to run back into the depths of the mine without looking back. The sounds of Zhou Cheng chasing him came from behind, and he ran even faster. He gradually stopped hearing any sounds coming from behind him, and finally came to a halt. He waited for a little while longer before turning around to return in the direction he came from. Along the way, he found Zhou Cheng collapsed on the ground. He couldn't be sure if the other party was dead. Therefore, he picked up some rocks by his feet and threw them at Zhou Cheng. Zhou Cheng did not react at all. Mustering up his courage, he walked over to Zhou Cheng and looked down. Zhou Cheng was lying in a large pool of blood that stained the ground red. The long sword was still stuck in his neck, and he was no longer breathing. Although Lu Ye's second attack had not taken Zhou Cheng's life directly, it had severed more than half of Zhou Cheng's neck. There was no way Zhou Cheng could survive with such a serious injury. Thus, the desperate battle finally ended with Lu Ye's victory. Lu Yi let out a long sigh of relief. He was increasingly coming to understand just how treacherous this world was. Walking forward, he grabbed the hilt of the sword. He was just about to pull the sword out when he noticed something out of place out of the corner of his eyes. Lifting his gaze in that direction, he felt his entire body going cold. Another person had arrived to stand in front of him at some point in time, and he didn't even notice anything at all. There is a huge gap in our cultivation. For some reason, this thought popped up in his mind. If this person wanted to kill him, it would only require the slightest effort, equivalent to lifting a single finger. It didn't make a difference even if he was enchanted with sharp edge. Gritting his teeth, he suppressed the panic in his heart and pulled out the long sword. He held the sword horizontally in front of him and took on a defensive posture, his body trembling slightly in fear. That person sensed Lu Ye's hostility toward him and couldn't help chuckling in response. I sense the fluctuations of spiritual power in this place, so I came to check out the situation. You don't need to be so scared. While he was speaking, he slowly approached in this direction. He stopped in front of Zhou Cheng, looked down and nodded slightly. The remnants of Evil Moon Valley. Then he raised his head again to look at Lu Yi. Which sect's disciple are you? They were standing no more than 3 meters apart, and Lu Yi finally got a clear glimpse of the other party's appearance. It was a tall and large old man with a ruddy complexion. The old man had a slightly hoarse voice, but it gave off an inexplicable sense of congeniality. Putting 2 and 2 together from the old man's question, Lu Yi immediately formed a conjecture in his heart. He replied, "Mystical Sky Sect." Mystical Sky Sect? The old man was a little surprised. The Mystical Sky Sect that was destroyed a year ago? Yes. Lu Yi gave an affirmative answer. The old man couldn't help looking Lu Yi up and down. So, you are a mining slave that was taken into captivity? Yes. Lu Yi nodded. The old man was incredibly astonished. A mining slave killed a cultivator from Evil Moon Valley? If I didn't witness it for myself, I wouldn't have believed it. He asked, "What is your cultivation?" "I unlocked one spiritual point," Lu Yi replied. Realizing the meaning behind the old man's question, he proactively offered up an explanation. "He was injured and I sneaked up on him." The old man looked at Lu Yi with a smile. "That's very courageous of you." "Old man, are you from Grand Sky Coalition?" Although Lu Yi had a guess in his heart, it was still better to confirm something like that. The old man stretched out his hand and stroked his beard. "That's right. I am from Grand Sky Coalition." Lu Yi was overjoyed to hear those words. It would seem that what Manager Yang had been worrying about had come true. Grand Sky Coalition had attacked this place, and Evil Moon Valley was unable to defend this mine. It could be seen just from the fact that the old man had killed his way into the mine. Grand Sky Coalition had already taken control over this mine. As for whether the old man was lying to him, that was completely unnecessary. The gap between their strength was too large. If the other party had malicious intentions, it would only take one hit to kill him. "Old man, please help me out of this predicament," Lu Yi quickly said. He wanted to leave this mine, but he did not know whether he would encounter more danger along the way. After finally meeting such a powerful senior, it was only natural that he wanted to rely on this senior to get out of this place safely. The old man nodded in response. "Follow me then. I was just about to head out myself." "Thank you, old man." Lu Yi was incredibly grateful. After the old man finished speaking, he turned to lead the way. However, Lu Yi did not follow immediately. Instead, he crouched down and began searching Zhou Cheng's corpse. He soon found a storage bag. A storage bag was something almost every cultivator had. It didn't seem to be something incredibly valuable. Feeling as though he was floating on cloud 9, he jogged to catch up with the old man. Then the old man turned to look at Lu Yi. He smiled and reached out his hand. "Hand it over." Lu Yi made a face as though he had swallowed a fly. Even so, he obediently handed the storage bag over to the old man after considering his current situation. The old man took the storage bag and placed his hand on the mouth of the bag. Then a ray of light flashed out. Just as Lu Yi was scolding the old man in his heart, the old man tossed the storage bag back to him. "I'll be taking this bottle of Dragon Tiger pills. This is too strong for you, you won't be able to take them. Think of it as honoring this old man." Lu Yi held the storage bag that was thrown back at him with both hands. Only then did he realize that the old man wasn't trying to snatch his spoils. The old man was simply lending him a helping hand, knowing that his cultivation was too weak to break the restraining lock on the storage bag. This old man sure is a nice guy. With that thought in his heart, he thanked the old man. Thank you. He was feeling very happy again. Humanity's Great Sage, Chapter 8, Embracing the Light. Inside the dark mining tunnel, Lu Yi followed behind the old man while inspecting the contents of the storage bag. He soon found some chi blood pills and several healing pills. Similar to Manager Yang's storage bag, there were various other bottles and jars inside, none of which he was familiar with. There were also a few ores, but the quality of those ores could not be compared to the ones Manager Yang had collected. Zhou Cheng's status was not as high as Manager Yang's, so it was only natural that his assets were not as plentiful as Manager Yang's. Even so, Lu Yi was very satisfied with his haul. It was something he gained without any effort after all. He put the long sword in his hand away into the storage bag and tied it around his waist. The storage bag he concealed on his body would be safer with this storage bag acting as a decoy. Although he wanted to ask the old man about matters related to cultivation and spirit pills, he decided against it after a brief consideration. The old man was a senior master. Even if he looked kind and friendly on the surface, who could say what kind of disposition he actually had inside? They only met each other by chance, and Lu Yi was certainly in no position to ask the old man for advice. Besides, his top priority was to follow the old man out of the mine. It would be losing sight of what was important in favor of trivialities if he offended the old man because of his impropriety and lack of conduct. Even though the old man didn't walk that fast, Lu Yi had to jog to keep up. Moreover, the old man would occasionally disappear without a word and return after a short while. Lu Yi secretly guessed that the old man had discovered some disciples of Evil Moon Valley hiding somewhere, and eliminated them. The paths in the mine crisscrossed each other like a maze, and the terrain was incredibly complex. Even Lu Yi needed some time to identify the correct direction at every intersection he came across. On the other hand, every path the old man took was the correct path even though he was simply walking along as though he was taking a leisurely stroll. In less than an hour, they saw a light coming from the front. It was the entrance of the mine. Lu Yi followed the old man out of the dark mining tunnel. When he embraced the light again, he couldn't help feeling emotional and dazed. He even experienced the wonderful feeling of being alive and whole in this world. Elder Tang. Several figures were standing guard at the entrance of the mine. These were cultivators from various sects under the Grand Sky Coalition, who were guarding against any Evil Moon Valley disciples from escaping this place. They bowed respectfully when they saw the old man. The old man nodded slightly in acknowledgement. A middle-aged cultivator, who looked like the leader among the other cultivators, glanced at Lu Yi questioningly and asked, "Elder Tang, this is?" The old man answered, "One of the disciples of Mystical Sky Sect, which was destroyed a year ago. He was taken captive and brought here as a mine slave. He helped me out a little inside, so I brought him along with me on my way out." The middle-aged cultivator understood the situation and raised his hand to beckon a young cultivator over. "Bring him over to record his identity." "Yes, sir," the young cultivator answered. Then he turned to Lu Yi and said, "Come with me." Lu Yi turned to look at Elder Tang. He wanted to thank the old man, but Elder Tang had already walked into the distance. The middle-aged cultivator who spoke up just now hurriedly chased after Elder Tang. "Elder Tang, Deputy Coalition Leader Pang instructed us to inform you that he wishes to see you as soon as you exit the mine. He has something important to discuss." Elder Tang stretched out his hand, stroked his beard and complained, "These old bones never get any rest." While saying that, he rose into the sky and disappeared in a flash. Meanwhile, Lu Yi was already heading in another direction under the lead of the young cultivator. That cultivator had no intention of talking to him whatsoever, so he remained silent. Thinking back on what Elder Tang mentioned just now, he smiled knowingly. That old man really is a nice person. I didn't even do anything to help him in the mine. On the contrary, I was the one who received all the help. And yet, that was what he said. It's obvious that he said those words on purpose. A senior master like the old man could resolve many of Lu Ye's troubles with just a casual word. Take the storage bag hanging at Lu Ye's waist for example. It was actually quite problematic for him to possess that storage bag in his current circumstances. The corresponding awareness had sprouted in his heart when he first took the item off of Zhou Cheng's corpse. He even decided that he would immediately hand the storage bag over if anybody from Grand Sky Coalition wanted it. After all, he was merely one of Evil Moon Valley's mining slaves. There would be occasions when he needed to depend on others. It had always been said that one had to be willing to give up on something in order to gain more things in the future. In any case, the actual good stuff was hidden on his body. Something as trivial as Zhou Cheng's storage bag was nothing to regret over. But, with that casual remark from Elder Tang just now, not a single person would dare to try and snatch that storage bag from him anymore. He felt a little regretful for not getting the chance to thank the old man in person. Nevertheless, he had a long future ahead of him. There would always be another chance in the future. Outside the mine was a huge mountain valley surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. The road located in the east was the only way in and out of this place. At this moment, the mountain valley was very crowded and people were bustling about everywhere. Lu Yi lifted his eyes to look around and saw many traces of a large battle left behind in the mountain valley. Bloodstains that were still wet stained the ground, and the entire mountain valley reeked of blood. Evil Moon Valley probably suffered a lot of casualties when Grand Sky Coalition attacked this place. Large flags were raised all over the mountain valley. Different words and patterns were engraved on those large flags, which probably represented the different sects and clans. The area beneath each flag was crowded and bustling with people. According to what Lu Yi knew, Grand Sky Coalition was an extremely large organization formed from many different factions, wherein countless sects and clans of all sizes had gathered together under one flag. Thus, all the forces he could see here were probably just the tip of the iceberg that made up Grand Sky Coalition. Thousand Demon Ridge, which was the antithesis of Grand Sky Coalition, had the same organizational structure. Lu Yi was in a good mood, having regained his freedom. Everything he saw felt new and exciting to him. As a result, the young cultivator leading the way had to urge him to move faster on several occasions. They finally arrived at a corner of the mountain valley. There were a lot of people gathered here too. However, these people were different from the brightly dressed and energetic cultivators he had seen on his way here. Most of them were dirty, sickly, and thin. Some of them looked lost and depressed, especially the young and beautiful women. The dirty ones were the mining slaves that had been working in the mine previously. Years of hard work and malnutrition made them look like refugees. On the other hand, not all the people captured by Evil Moon Valley were made into mining slaves. There were some young and beautiful girls in the mix. Unfortunately, their fates were generally more wretched than becoming mining slaves. Even though the mine had been seized and they were rescued from their nightmares, the tragic experience they lived through would never be forgotten. Looking at this bunch of people, Lu Yi immediately understood. These people were the ones who had been oppressed by Evil Moon Valley. All those who regained their freedom had been gathered in this place for some reason. A table had been placed in front of these people, and an extremely fat cultivator sat behind the table. This person looked to be quite young. He was currently leaning back against the chair, and taking a nap with his arms folded across his chest. The young cultivator, who had led Lu Yi to this place, strode forward and lightly rapped his knuckles against the table. That fat cultivator jumped violently and nearly fell off the chair. When he finally got a clear look at the person standing in front of him, he patted his chest in relief. "You little bastard. You nearly scared me to death." The young cultivator looked speechless. Lowering his voice, he said, "Brother Pang, record-keeping might be an easy job, but you shouldn't slack off so openly. If the elders in the coalition see you..." Without waiting for the other party to finish his sentence, the fat cultivator waved his hand impatiently. I got it. You only know how to nag all day long like a woman." Pausing for a moment, he asked, "What is it?" The young cultivator stepped aside and revealed Lu Yi, who was standing behind him. "Register this person and verify his identity." Due to how obese the fat cultivator was, his eyes were almost invisible under all that fat on his face. Nevertheless, those small eyes widened suddenly when he saw Lu Yi. His gaze was fixed on the storage bag hanging from Lu Ye's waist. Humanity's Great Sage, Chapter 9 Identification. The fat cultivator sitting behind the table took out a palm-sized jade slip from his storage bag. Then he looked back up at Lu Yi and asked, "Name, origin and cultivation?" Lu Yi answered those questions one by one. That fat cultivator muttered under his breath, "Lu Yi of Mystical Sky Sect. Yes, I found it. There's certainly somebody with that name." Only then did Lu Yi realize that the jade slip in the fat cultivator's hand probably contained some sort of information from the mine, including the origins and identities of the mining slaves. A check like this could ensure that none of the remnants from Evil Moon Valley had snuck in among these people. But this isn't right. The fat cultivator narrowed his eyes. It is recorded in the jade slip that Lu Yi is an ordinary man who has not been enlightened. But you have unlocked your first spiritual point. This doesn't tally with the records. This is going to be difficult. While speaking, he kept sneaking glances at the storage bag hanging at Lu Ye's waist. Lu Yi secretly laughed to himself. I was right to be worried back then. It's easy for a mining slave carrying a storage bag to attract unnecessary attention and greed. According to his original plan, he would have handed this storage bag over without much fuss. He would simply be buying his way out of trouble. Besides, he was free now. His future prospects were as vast as the sea. Why would he fear not being able to find anything better? But there was nothing to fear after that casual remark Elder Tang made before. More importantly, he could not waste the old man's kindness. Confronting the fat cultivator's doubts directly, he explained, I encountered an injured Evil Moon Valley cultivator in the mine and killed him. I unlocked my spiritual point in that moment of life and death. The fat cultivator frowned at those words. If what Lu Yi said was true, then it was quite an amazing feat. A tiger was still a tiger, injured or not. It wasn't something a mountain goat could provoke, let alone kill. Nevertheless, he was starting to understand where that storage bag hanging from Lu Ye's waist had come from. At this moment, the young cultivator who led Lu Yi to this place leaned over and whispered something in the fat cultivator's ear. The fat cultivator was surprised. Which Elder Tang? The young cultivator said nothing and simply stared at the fat cultivator in silence. The fat cultivator came back to his senses and coughed lightly. When he glanced at Lu Yi again, his expression had become much kinder than before. I see. You sure are a brave man. Yes, well, your identity has more or less been confirmed, but procedures still have to be followed. Come with me. While saying that, he stood up. Senior Brother Pang, I'll be heading back now. The young cultivator cupped his fists. Go on. Go on. The fat cultivator waved his hand dismissively. Following behind the fat cultivator, Lu Yi walked toward the place where many of the mining slaves were gathered. When they got closer, the fat cultivator placed his hand on his waist and panted lightly before speaking up. Is there anybody from Mystical Sky Sect here? Step forward for me. Nobody answered. Lu Yi swept his gaze over the crowd and did not see any faces belonging to the disciples of Mystical Sky Sect. Mystical Sky Sect was a small sect that didn't have that many disciples in the first place. Many people died during Evil Moon Valley's attack 1 year ago. Only 20 or so young people had survived at the time. Many more had died over the course of the year, but he distinctly recalled that there should have been 3 or 5 more who were still alive. Seeing as none of those 3 or 5 people were in this place, it was easy to imagine what had become of them. He couldn't help feeling a little sad. Although he did not feel a sense of belonging in Mystical Sky Sect, he couldn't help realizing more and more acutely about how cruel this world was now that he was the last surviving member of his sect. The fat cultivator continued then, does anybody know this person? Again nobody answered. Lu Yi was not very popular among the mining slaves. Everybody else was thin and sickly, struggling to survive every single day. On the other hand, he was living a good life. He even had enough contribution points to redeem chi blood pills. Therefore, the other mining slaves did not look kindly upon him. The same unfortunate experience did not make people unify against a common enemy. Instead, it was easier to breed resentment and hatred among themselves. Lu Yi noticed the brothers from the Lu family clan among the crowd. Those two were incredibly lucky to have survived until now. Needless to say, they had no intention of coming forward to verify his identity. They were simply watching him and enjoying his misery. The fat cultivator involuntarily glanced at Lu Yi. He was starting to doubt whether Lu Yi was a cultivator from Mystical Sky Sect. As a mining slave, there should be somebody who could prove his identity. Many people had been checked in this same manner previously. They had identified each other and verified each other's identities. I know him. He is Lu Yi of Mystical Sky Sect. Just as the fat cultivator was getting increasingly suspicious, a weak voice rang out. Who is speaking? The fat cultivator shifted his gaze to look in the direction of the voice. The crowd parted to reveal the speaker. When Lu Yi saw the person's face, he couldn't help feeling a little surprised. That was because he had only met this person once before. Moreover, it had been a long time since they last saw each other. The person who spoke up was a woman. Compared to the other unkempt mining slaves around her, her clothes were not the most beautiful. Nevertheless, they were neat and clean. The fat cultivator looked at the woman and asked in a low voice, "Are you certain he is Lu Yi of Mystical Sky Sect? Think clearly before you speak. The consequences of lying to me are dire." The woman shrank back slightly but repeated in a firm voice, "I am certain." The fat cultivator nodded and waved Lu Yi away. "All right, your identity has been proven. Go over there and wait. Don't run around." After saying that, he winked at Lu Yi. "There will be a great opportunity waiting for you tomorrow." The tense atmosphere finally let up the moment he walked away. It could be seen that these mining slaves who lived at the bottom of the food chain were quite scared of that fat cultivator. Lu Yi mulled over something for a bit. Then he walked toward the woman who spoke up just now. When he got closer, he said, "Miss, thank you for your righteous words." The woman shook her head. "No need. You saved me once before. I didn't even have the time to thank you at the time." She was talking about something that happened nearly half a year ago. Back then, he had encountered this woman by chance. She was being chased by another mining slave. Unable to continue watching, he had taught that mining slave who assaulted her a hard lesson. It was just that he had not seen this woman again ever since that incident. He smiled. "Then are we even?" The woman smiled too. Her lethargic expression regained some of its vitality. "We're even. Let's get to know each other again. I am Lu Yi of Mystical Sky Sect." The woman bowed politely, clearly displaying the demeanor of a proper lady. "I am Yu Xiaotaya of the Yu family clan." He asked out of curiosity, "Miss Yu, do you know why we have been gathered here? What was that opportunity the fatty was talking about just now?" Yu Xiaotaya reached out her hand to push her hair behind her ear and explained, "All the people here come from known backgrounds, and their identities have been proven. Most have not achieved enlightenment, and even those who have achieved enlightenment are of low cultivation. Evil Moon Valley did not treat us as humans, so they didn't bother training us. But there must be some among us who are suitable for cultivation. Since Grand Sky Coalition sees this place, it is only natural that they want to accommodate some of us. Those among us who are suitable for cultivation and have the aptitude for cultivation will be taken in by the sects under the Grand Sky Coalition." Is that the opportunity the fatty was talking about? The realization suddenly dawned on Lu Yi. Humanity's Great Sage Chapter 10 Opportunity. "Brother Lu, have you achieved enlightenment?" Yu Xiaotaya asked. "Why do you ask that?" Lu Yi countered with another question without answering her question. She pointed at the storage bag hanging at his waist. He had a moment of realization and nodded in response. "That's right." Then he asked, "What about you?" She lifted a hand and a faint light bloomed from her palm. It was clear that she had also achieved enlightenment. It was just that he did not know how many spiritual points she had unlocked. Unfortunately, it wasn't something he could ask since they were not that familiar with each other. They were both cultivators who had unlocked their spiritual points, so there were many common topics between them to talk about. Even though there were close to 1,000 people gathered in this place, not many among them had achieved enlightenment. Moreover, those who had achieved enlightenment had very low cultivation. Those with real aptitude for cultivation had been taken in by Evil Moon Valley, and subsequently became Evil Moon Valley's disciples. One could only imagine what had become of them now. She lowered her voice and said, "The opportunity tomorrow is extremely important. You must not let it slip by. Brother Lu, you should showcase your talents as much as possible if you have any special talents. This will affect your entire future." She seemed to know something. He replied, I got it. Having said that, he didn't have any special talents. All he had was a skill tree that nobody could see. Unfortunately, it was impossible for him to reveal the skill tree to anybody. It wasn't good for him to remain among a group of women for long, so he only said a few more words to her before taking his leave. There were a lot of enslaved people gathered in this place, but the range they could move in was limited. He looked around briefly and headed directly in the direction of a corner. Somewhere in that direction, the brothers of the Lu family clan were hiding behind a group of people and shivering in fear. Their complexions turned deathly pale when they saw Lu Yi heading in their direction. By the time he arrived in front of them, both of them looked even more panicked than before. "WW, what do you want?" Big Brother Lu shouted in a threatening manner even though he was shaking inside. While speaking, he kept glancing in the direction of the fat cultivator as if trying to reach out for help. The only answer he received was a fist that zoomed at him and endlessly magnified in his eyes. One punch was all it took to break his nose and he instantly collapsed to the ground. Then Lu Yi kicked Second Brother Lu in the stomach. Before Second Brother Lu could fall to the ground, Lu Yi grabbed him by the hair. "Strange. You don't seem to recognize me anymore." Second Brother Lu's expression was filled with pain. He even had stars spinning around in front of his eyes. How could he answer? Lu Yi snorted coldly. Exerting some strength in his hand, he threw Second Brother Lu behind him. Second Brother Lu fell headfirst to the ground and ate a mouthful of dirt. 2 of his teeth were knocked out as a result. After occupying their spot, Lu Yi sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes to meditate. His first spiritual point was brimming with power, but he couldn't locate the spot to unlock his second spiritual point. He didn't continue cultivating, lest he waste his vitality. When evening rolled around, the people from Grand Sky Coalition came over to distribute some food and bedding. Everybody received some, but Lu Yi didn't have enough to fill his belly. Fortunately, there was some food in Zhou Cheng's spiritual bag. Taking some out, he began eating with gusto. The people beside him practically drooled as they watched him, but nobody dared to step forward to ask him for some. Ever since he taught the brothers of the Lu family clan a lesson, he occupied a large area all to himself, saved him a lot of trouble. After he began refining his vitality into qi, his appetite grew larger and larger by the day. Thus, he even managed to eat that dried meat with great relish. Nothing happened that night. When the next day arrived, Lu Yi was full of energy. He was looking forward to that so-called opportunity. It wasn't until after breakfast that more than 10 cultivators dressed in different styles came to stand in front of the crowd. The person leading them was a middle-aged man. That person stood with his hands behind his back and swept his gaze over the crowd with a small smile. "You youngsters come from different sects and clans. Having been taken into captivity and enslaved in this place, you have gone through a lot of hardships. However, that kind of life has come to an end. All the sects in Grand Sky Coalition are recruiting talented people. Those among you who achieved enlightenment or have the aptitude for cultivation will all have the opportunity to join one of those sects. Make good use of this opportunity, and we might be able to fight side by side in the future." After saying that, he beckoned lightly with his hand. More than 10 cultivators dressed in different styles standing behind that person stepped forward. The first person swept his hand out in a circle. "All of you, come with me." That sweeping gesture was accompanied by a burst of spiritual power that enveloped approximately 100 people. When those people walked forward, that cultivator led them to one side. The same went for the second person. There were around 1,000 slaves. It was just enough to split between these 10 cultivators. Lu Yi was in the innermost location, so he fell into the hands of the last cultivator. The last group followed that cultivator a short distance away, and came to a certain area where there were other cultivators dressed in the same style as the cultivator who led them here. Those cultivators came forward to maintain order, and got everybody to stand in a line. Lu Yi stood in the middle of the line. Glancing around, he saw that all the other slaves who were taken away earlier were in the same situation as him. Thus, he realized that they were about to undergo some sort of test to see who among these slaves had achieved enlightenment or were suitable for cultivation. Judging by the words of that middle-aged cultivator from before, those who had achieved enlightenment would have a greater advantage. As for those who had neither achieved enlightenment nor have the aptitude for cultivation, they would not be valued highly. Once everybody was lined up in an orderly fashion, the cultivator who led them here took out a table from within his storage bag and sat down behind the table. Afterward, he lifted his head to say, "Let's begin." The first slave walked over to him at his signal. Another cultivator asked, "Have you achieved enlightenment?" The slave shook his head. "No." "Okay." The cultivator who asked the question took out a crystal ball and pushed it over to the slave. He instructed, "Put both hands on it." The slave did as he was told, but the crystal ball did not react. The cultivator sitting behind the table shook his head. No aptitude for cultivation. Next. The slave was a little sad and frustrated to hear those words. He hurriedly said, "I wasn't ready. Please let me try again." Next. The cultivated flicked his sleeves and the chattering slave was swept aside and fell to the ground. That scene made all the other slaves who were waiting in line very uneasy. They understood that whether or not they could change their fates would depend entirely on that crystal ball. Hence, their energy faltered slightly. The slaves came forward one by one. None of them had the aptitude for cultivation. It wasn't until the 13th person placed both hands on the crystal ball that the crystal ball that had not reacted up until now suddenly glowed with a faint blue light. Finally, "There's one." The cultivator sitting behind the table broke out into a smile. He looked up at the slave. "Name?" The slave's face flushed with excitement, and he answered truthfully. The cultivator sitting behind the table took out something that looked like a jade tablet. Spiritual power flowed through his hands and that jade tablet soon displayed that slave's name. Handing the jade tablet over to the slave, he said, "Take good care of this. You will be using it in the future. Now go to the tent over there and look for my third senior brother to check how talented you are." Yes. Thank you, sir." The slave held the jade tablet in his hands as though he was holding a precious treasure and jogged toward the back. There was a simple tent set up at the back. Humanity's Great Sage, Chapter 11. An Introduction to the Sect. Upon seeing that, Lu Yi immediately understood that there were two parts to the test. The first part was to find out whether a person had the aptitude to cultivate. The second part was to ascertain how talented a person was. Aptitude and talent were two different things. The former determined whether a person had the right to cultivate at all. The latter was an important factor in a person's future achievements. Theoretically, a highly talented person would achieve greater heights in the future. Certainly, due to the limitations, the talent examination was just a general test, and accuracy couldn't be guaranteed. However, the margin of error was pretty small. Lu Yi wasn't worried about his aptitude at all. Since he had been enlightened, there was no doubt that he could cultivate. Nevertheless, it was hard to tell how talented he was, and he wasn't sure about it himself. Therefore, he could only find out the result after going through a test behind the tent. When the first person with the aptitude to cultivate appeared, the listless group of people became slightly energized. At that instant, they thought that they could probably cut it. However, reality was cruel. More than 10 people had been eliminated in the test before the next person with an aptitude appeared again. Then the same scene went on and on. The long line slowly shortened as the slave's hope turned into despair. Generally, there would be one person with the aptitude to cultivate for every dozen people. The ratio was pretty close to what Lu Yi had speculated. He was at the latter half of the line. However, since the test could be carried out quickly, he reached the desk in just 1 hour. "Have you been enlightened?" The cultivator behind the desk asked a question that he had asked countless times before. "I've unlocked one spiritual point," Lu Yi replied honestly. Upon hearing that, the cultivator quickly lifted his head and examined him before he put on a smile. "That's great. Finally, there's a person who has been enlightened." Although 7 to 8 people had passed the aptitude test, they hadn't been enlightened. Among this group of people, Lu Yi was the first one who had been enlightened. "Come on. Place your hands on it." The cultivator pointed at the crystal ball on the desk. Lu Yi was puzzled as he thought that this thing was to test a person's aptitude. Since he had been enlightened, why was there still a need to go through the test? Seeing through the doubt in Lu Ye's heart, the cultivator explained, I'm not only responsible for testing the aptitude of all of you, but I'll also have to ascertain your attributes. Our attributes? Lu Yi was perplexed as he had never heard of it before. Perhaps it was because Lu Yi had been enlightened. The cultivator decided to patiently explain it to him. Gold, wood, water, fire, and earth are the 5 elements. Everyone's spiritual power is skewed towards one of them, and this is what we call an attribute. Every attribute has a different emphasis. I see. Lu Yi finally understood what the crystal ball was for. Then he asked doubtfully, what about those people? The cultivator replied with a smile, they haven't even been enlightened, so they have no spiritual power, which is why it's impossible to examine their attributes. I see. Upon hearing his explanation, Lu Yi lifted his hands and placed them on the crystal ball. Activate your spiritual power and infuse it into the ball, the cultivator uttered. Lu Yi did as he was told, then he stared fixedly at the transformation of the crystal ball. He was curious what attribute he was. The crystal ball started glowing, which went to show that he had the aptitude to cultivate. However, since he had been enlightened, the outcome was meaningless to him. The following change was the result of his attributes. Under his attention, an orange flame was suddenly ignited inside the crystal ball. Then it started burning brightly. His pupils contracted when he saw that because the orange flame looked familiar to him. Oh! The cultivator behind the desk arched his brow as his interest was piqued. Your main attribute is fire, and your supporting attribute is gold. That's not bad. All right. Retract your hands now. Lu Yi could understand that his main attribute was fire. After all, it was thanks to the skill tree that he was enlightened. At that time, it was the tree that had swallowed an orange flame that allowed him to be enlightened all of a sudden. The tree leaf with the spiritual pattern, sharp edge, was ablaze as well. However, he didn't understand why his supporting attribute was gold, as he had a feeling that this was his original attribute. Keep it and go over to the tent at the back to look for my 3rd senior brother. The cultivator gave Lu Yi a jade tablet. Lu Yi thanked him and took it. Then, he saw that his name and a symbol that should mean that he had unlocked one spiritual point had been engraved on one side, while the other side was engraved with his attribute. Moving past the desk, he kept walking forward. There was a temporary tent in a nearby place. Everyone who had passed the aptitude test had to enter it to get their talent checked. Before entering the tent, Lu Yi apologized to the person inside it before he pulled the curtains open and stepped into it. It was spacious inside the tent. There was a cultivator with a solemn and cold expression who was seated on a futon with his legs crossed. With his eyes closed, he appeared to be taking a rest. It seemed that he was 3rd senior brother. On a spot near 3rd senior brother, there was a disc that was made from some kind of wood. The disc was as large as a table and there were 8 pits around the edge. Some bare saplings had even grown on the pits. Lu Yi walked up to him and cupped his fists. Nice to meet you. My name is Lu Yi. Please examine my jade tablet, senior brother. 3rd senior brother opened his eyes and took the jade tablet. After looking at both sides, he arched his brow. You've been enlightened? Then he made a gesture with his hand. Have a seat. It seemed that the disc was used to ascertain a person's talent. Lu Yi stepped onto the table and sat down in the center with his legs crossed. Inadvertently, he saw that many complicated patterns had been engraved on it. Are they spiritual patterns? Lu Yi's interest was piqued as he studied the patterns. However, he did not have enough knowledge to find out what these patterns were for. The only spiritual pattern he knew was sharp edge. The patterns engraved on the disc were complicated and dense. They were so well connected that they looked like a unibody. They're not just spiritual patterns. Lu Yi finally understood what it was as he recalled something that he had heard of before. It's called an array. Is an array made up of spiritual patterns? Ahem. 3rd senior brother's cough made Lu Yi snap back to reality as he quickly straightened up. As they stared at each other, the place fell into silence. Suddenly, 3rd senior brother uttered, Green Jade Sect is located on Mount Heavenly Tree, which is a strategic location in Bingzhou. We have 300 spirit peaks of different heights. We're one of the top 5 sects in Bingzhou in terms of comprehensive power. Our sect master and deputy sect masters are all in the Divine Ocean realm. Under the sect master, there are about 100 real lake realm masters. Initially, Lu Yi thought that third senior brother was a taciturn man, but at this moment, he realized that he was mistaken. Third senior brother was incessant as he kept talking about Green Jade sect, which made Lu Yi to feel lost. For some reason, as he listened to third senior brother's narration, he had a strong sense of déjà vu. When third senior brother talked about the sword techniques and cultivation techniques of his sect, the memories that Lu Yi had forgotten seemed to be springing back into his mind. The corners of Lu Ye's mouth twitched as he wondered if this was the introduction to the sect before a disciple was recruited in the cultivation world. Humanity's Great Sage Chapter 12. Take it as if I didn't tell you anything. The grim-looking third senior brother went on to talk all about Green Jade sect. Moments later he changed the topic by saying, "Your main attribute is fire. I remember that we do have a fire desolation technique which should suit you. Certainly you can work on your metal attribute if you want. We do have some metal attribute techniques. Furthermore, if you join our sect, you'll get 2 spirit restoring pills every month even if you're just an apprentice. If you pass the test and become a formal disciple, you'll get even more." Lu Yi hurriedly bowed his head. Got it. In his heart, he was feeling doubtful as it seemed that third senior brother was trying to recruit him. It appeared that as a cultivator who had been enlightened, he was in an advantageous position. With this thought in mind, he was secretly elated. Third senior brother went on to say, "All right, stay seated and focus your mind. You might feel a slight pain later, but you don't have to worry. It's just a process to examine your talent, so don't resist it with your spiritual power." Got it, Lu Yi replied and placed his hands on his knees with his palms facing up. Then he closed his eyes. The next moment he could feel the fluctuation of spiritual power. Although he was curious about what third senior brother was doing, he didn't think he should open his eyes. As the spiritual energy undulated, he felt a vibration on his backside. He reckoned that the array on the disc was beginning to take effect. Just like what he thought, third senior brother had stuffed 8 silkworm-sized crystals into the 8 pits around the edge of the disc. They were the spirit stones that cultivators used to set up an array. Lu Yi had never seen these stones before. When third senior brother activated the array, smoke started billowing from the spirit stones inside the pits. The smoke was the spiritual power stored inside the stones, and with the help of the array, it turned into very pure spiritual qi. The thick spiritual qi soon spread around the disc. However, there seemed to be an invisible barrier around the disc as the spiritual qi was restricted in it. The seated Lu Yi felt his chest tightening. Although he had closed his eyes, he could sense that he was surrounded by some mystical stuff as they penetrated his body, which made him feel refreshed. Is this spiritual qi? Lu Yi understood that absorbing the spiritual qi in the world was one of the main ways a cultivator could cultivate. When he was inside the mine, he had tried it before. Perhaps it was because of the terrain, he did not feel any spiritual qi inside the mine, so he had no choice but to refine vitality into qi instead. After he was brought out of the mine by the old man surnamed Tang, he forgot to sense the spiritual qi in the world. It wasn't until this moment that he could directly sense the existence of spiritual qi. However, recalling third senior brother's advice, he suppressed his urge to absorb the spiritual qi. Facing across from him, third senior brother was performing a hand seal as he continuously activated the array's power. At the same time, he was staring fixedly at the saplings around the edge of the disc. The array on the disc was to examine a person's talent. When third senior brother activated the array's power, the 8 spirit stones stuck around the disc would release their spiritual power, which then turned into thick spiritual qi. Under his control, the spiritual qi would be led into the body of the person being tested and then swirl around the array, which caused the saplings around the disc to go through some changes. In a nutshell, Lu Yi, who was seated on the disc, was actually a terminal that the spiritual qi passed through and spread around the array, which then caused the saplings to change. The more saplings that had gone through transformation, the more talented the person was, and vice versa. Fundamentally, the test was to find out whether the spiritual qi could easily pass through the person's body. If the process was smooth, the cultivator would be deemed as highly talented. Basically, a cultivator had to strengthen the spiritual qi in his body. If the spiritual qi couldn't even move around his body smoothly, it was pointless for him to cultivate. Beside the disc, third senior brother continued working on the array. Seeing that the 8 saplings did not change one bit, he frowned and expended more power on the array. At that instant, Lu Yi scowled as he could faintly feel that his entire body was in pain, as if a lot of external spiritual qi was madly penetrating his body, which made him feel that countless needles had been jabbed into him. As time passed, the pain became increasingly unbearable. Just when he almost couldn't take it anymore, the pain all over his body vanished all of a sudden. Following that, third senior brother uttered, "It's done." Lu Yi quickly opened his eyes and let out a long breath. As their eyes met, he realized that third senior brother's gaze appeared conflicted. His chest tightened as he had a terrible feeling. "Senior brother, how is my talent?" Lu Yi asked. Without uttering a word, third senior brother took a look at the disc before he whisked across the jade tablet with his hand and returned it to Lu Yi. Lu Yi took it and realized that on the side where his attribute was engraved, one more word had appeared. What does it mean? He wanted to ask what had happened, but third senior brother apparently had no intention of speaking further, so he reckoned that he shouldn't be relentless. Getting to his feet on the disc, he saluted him. "Thanks, senior brother." When he turned to leave, he saw that a tree leaf had grown on one of the 8 bare saplings around the disc. Could the word on the jade tablet represent a sapling? He speculated. "Wait a minute," third senior brother suddenly uttered. Lu Yi, who was already at the door, turned around and asked, "What's wrong, senior brother?" Third senior brother replied, "Just take it as that I did not tell you anything just now." Upon hearing that, Lu Yi was rendered speechless. After leaving the tent, he took a deep breath repeatedly as he had a premonition. He wasn't certain whether his talent was good or terrible, but judging from the change in third senior brother's attitude, he felt that something was off. He reckoned that his talent was a little unusual, so he decided to look for someone to ask about it. When he looked around and saw someone standing silently in the corner, he directly walked up to her. Before he even reached her, the woman saw him and beckoned to him with a smile. Standing in front of the woman, Lu Yi called out to her, "Miss Yu." Yu Xiaotaya elegantly saluted him. "Brother Lu." It was apparent that she was in a better mood than the previous day, as she had passed the test, and her result was all right. Lu Yi passed her his jade tablet and asked, "Can you explain to me what's wrong with my talent?" As Yu Xiaotaya was taking the tablet, she replied with a smile, "Brother Lu, since you've been enlightened, your talent is definitely not terrible." She saw the word on the back of the jade tablet when she uttered the last 2 words, which was why her eyelids twitched and her tone sounded hesitant. Upon seeing her reaction, Lu Yi realized that his talent left much to be desired. "Miss Yu, how is your talent?" Lu Yi asked. Yu Xiaotaya replied, "It's similar to yours." Lu Yi waved his hand. "You don't have to console me. I understand what's going on. The smaller the number, the lower the talent, right?" With her lips pressed together, Yu Xiaotaya had the intention of consoling him, but she wasn't sure what to say. Eventually, she could only bow her head. "Yes." No wonder. Lu Yi recalled the last words third senior brother said to him and thought that these cultivators were pretty snobbish. Yu Xiaotaya went on to say, "Brother Lu, you don't have to feel dejected. The test isn't very accurate, and the array used isn't a high-rank one, so mistakes do happen sometimes." Lu Yi replied with a smile, "I don't know what array that is. However, since the result is there, I can only accept it." Yu Xiaotaya looked curiously at him. "Do you really think it's all right?" Lu Yi didn't seem to be pretending to be nonchalant. Most people would be utterly disappointed if they got this kind of result. Lu Yi looked away and replied with a smile, "Compared to those people, I'm considered lucky since I've been enlightened." Following his gaze, Yu Xiaotaya could see a lot of crestfallen people over there. Those people had all been eliminated as they were unable to pass the aptitude test. The Lu brothers were among them. Humanity's Great Sage, Chapter 13. What is going on? Oh. By the way, how is your talent? Lu Yi turned his head and asked. Judging from Yu Xiaotaya's expression, he knew that her talent must be good, but he still wanted to make a comparison. He wanted to find out how terrible his talent was that made third senior brother change his attitude in such a drastic way. Yu Xiaotaya was already holding her jade tablet, but upon hearing his question, she subconsciously concealed it. It wasn't that she wanted to hide anything from him, but that she didn't want to hurt his feeling. Lu Yi teased her by saying, "Are you looking down on me? Don't you know that men bounce back stronger after we're hurt?" A helpless Yu Xiaotaya asked, "Brother Lu, do you really want to see it?" Lu Yi replied with a smile, "Since my result has been revealed, it can't get any worse." After giving it some thought, Yu Xiaotaya uttered, "You're right. You're such a big-hearted person." Admiration was written all over her face. Since Lu Yi had said so, there was no reason for her to reject his request. The information on the jade tablet wasn't confidential anyway. Then she extended her hand and passed the jade tablet to him. Lu Yi took it and saw that the side facing him was carved with her name. Then he turned it around and saw that the word wood was engraved on it. It seemed that her main attribute was wood. Below her attribute there was a number, 38. Lu Yi was dumbfounded as this was different from what he had imagined. Then he asked, "Miss Yu, why is it 38? Isn't the highest number supposed to be 8? He remembered clearly that there were only 8 saplings around the disc, so why would there be 38, which was beyond the reasonable limits? The highest number is 64. Yu Xiaotaya was puzzled by what he said. Then she made a calculation with her hand and murmured, 8 saplings times 8 leaves. That's 64. Theoretically, the most talented person would get 64 leaves. Lu Yi stared at her as the light in his eyes went out. A flabbergasted Yu Xiaotaya called out to him, "Brother Lu, are you all right?" He had just said that men would bounce back stronger after they were hurt, so why was he hurt so terribly after she showed him her jade tablet? Yu Xiaotaya blamed herself and thought that she shouldn't have let him see her tablet. "Be strong, Brother Lu. Just give me some time to calm myself down." Lu Yi waved his hand and looked up at the sky with a listless gaze. Finally, he realized that the number 1 on the back of his jade tablet did not represent a sapling but a leaf. During the talent test, every sapling could grow 8 leaves. Since there were 8 saplings, the maximum one could get were 64 leaves. The number 38 was engraved on Yu Xiaotaya's jade tablet, which meant that during the talent test, she had managed to make the saplings grow 38 leaves. On the other hand, his result was 1 leaf instead of a sapling. At that instant, Lu Yi felt terribly hurt. He had tried his best to lower his expectation, but in the end, he realized that his lowest expectation wasn't even the bottom. 1 out of 8 and 1 out of 64 were completely different stories. "Brother Lu," Yu Xiaotaya looked worriedly at him as she could feel that he was engulfed in a gloomy atmosphere. He no longer looked as energetic as he was earlier. Although talent is important, it isn't everything. "Brother Lu, I once heard that the heavenly way rewards those who are hard-working. I guess you haven't heard of the saying that the heavenly way does not favor anything in the world as it lets nature take its course." "What?" Yu Xiaotaya felt that something was off. Lu Yi took a deep breath and pulled himself together. He was still frustrated, but just like what he had said, since the result was there, all he could do was face it. Moreover, he still had the skill tree. Even if he wasn't highly talented, the amazing tree might still make up for his deficiency. "Tell me what the talent test is based on," Lu Yi asked. Although he had gone through the test in the tent, he did not know how it was carried out as his eyes remained closed throughout the entire process. Instead of immediately explaining it to him, Yu Xiaotaya looked seriously at him. Noticing the worry behind her gaze, Lu Yi said with a smile, "I'm really fine." After a sigh, Yu Xiaotaya replied, "Since you want to know, I'll tell you what I understand about the test." Then, she went on to tell him the theories and process of the test. Upon hearing her explanation, Lu Yi asked, "Does that mean that it's difficult for the spiritual qi to be let into my body? Is that why my talent is regarded as low?" He couldn't help but recall how he felt at that time. The external spiritual qi penetrated his body but couldn't get out, which caused him to be in pain. Yu Xiaotaya nodded. "That's right. I see." Lu Yi finally understood what had happened, but soon something started bothering him. But what could it really tell? How can they determine whether a person's talent is high or low based on this kind of superficial factor? Don't get me wrong. I'm not doubting that my talent is low. I just want to know the reason behind it. Seeing how he attempted to reassure her that he was fine, Yu Xiaotaya was torn between tears and laughter. Then she explained patiently, Brother Lu, do you know how a cultivator can get stronger? Lu Yi replied, consume spirit pills, absorb spiritual qi, refine vitality into qi, and make use of spirit stones. That's right. Yu Xiaotaya nodded. However, the main ways are still absorbing spiritual qi and making use of spirit stones. The other two methods are just auxiliary. If it's difficult to lead the external spiritual qi into your body, it'll be less efficient for you to cultivate, and your talent will be deemed low. Given the same time and resources, a highly talented cultivator will unlock more spiritual points and achieve greater heights in the future. Since you've been enlightened, I'm sure you're aware of how difficult it is to cultivate. Lu Yi recalled his days in the dark mine. He would consume qi blood pills every day and refine vitality into qi. As he felt himself growing stronger by the day, he didn't think that it was difficult. Instead, he was joyful. Yu Xiaotaya said that a cultivator mainly relied on absorbing spiritual qi and making use of spirit stones, while consuming pills and refining vitality into qi were just auxiliary methods. It seemed that he had been doing it in the wrong way. Feeling that something was amiss, he asked, Miss Yu, how long did it take you to fill your first spiritual point after you unlocked it? If there was a direct comparison, he could judge how efficient it was for him to cultivate. He still didn't believe that his talent was so terrible. It took me about 20 days, Yu Xiaotaya replied. She didn't ask how long it took Lu Yi to achieve that, because she was worried that this question would hurt his feelings again. Given his talent, even if he had the help of pills, it would probably take him a few months to fill his first spiritual point. Since Lu Yi had saved her before, she was still grateful to him. At that moment, she found him to be pitiful. As expected, Lu Yi appeared startled upon hearing what she had said. Then he muttered, about 20 days. Yu Xiaotaya quickly said, Brother Lu, our situations are different. Previously, I was taken away by an evil Moon Valley's disciple. I guess she wanted to make use of me to cultivate an evil technique, which was why she helped me enlighten and even gave me some spirit-restoring pills. That's the reason I could fill my spirit point in about 20 days. She had actually consumed some pills to shorten the time. On the other hand, Lu Yi had only consumed some cheap qi blood pills, but it only took him more than 10 days to fill his first spiritual point, which was faster than what she had achieved. What is going on? Humanity's Great Sage, Chapter 14 Realms. All the signs showed that, even though Lu Yi wasn't highly talented, his result couldn't possibly be only one leaf. Does it have something to do with the skill tree? There are some spiritual patterns on the leaves of the tree, but how do they help me in my cultivation? Besides the skill tree, he couldn't find any other explanation. In that case, he had a feeling that the skill tree wasn't as simple as it appeared to be. Miss Yu, there's something I need to ask you about. He decided to change the topic to stop feeling sorrowful. Just ask away, Brother Lu. Yu Xiaotaya looked solemnly at him. After pondering on how he should word it, he said, the thing is, my first spiritual point is full now, and I want to unlock the second one. However, I can't locate where it is. How should I solve this? This question had been plaguing him for several days. He thought that after his first spiritual point was full, he could readily unlock the second one. However, after several attempts, he still couldn't locate the second spiritual point. He had even wasted a lot of spiritual power during the process. There was no doubt that Yu Xiaotaya was more experienced than he was, and she was his only friend in this place, which was why he wanted to ask her about it. To people like us who have just started cultivating, this is indeed a tricky problem. This has nothing to do with aptitude or talent. The main problem is that our spiritual power is still weak, which is why it's hard for us to locate the spiritual point. If you want to solve this problem, you'll either have to explore it on your own or look for a strong cultivator to help you. When I was unlocking the second spiritual point, it was the cultivator from Evil Moon Valley who helped lead my spiritual power to the second point. In order to do that, the cultivator has to be in the Cloud River realm at the very least. Upon hearing that, Lu Yi put on a bitter smile. I'll explore it on my own then. He couldn't think of anyone who could help him. Brother Lu, all the cultivators' source spiritual points are similar, but due to the fact that we cultivate different techniques, the location of each individual's second spiritual point is different. If you don't have a suitable technique, I suggest that you don't unlock your second point on a whim. Otherwise, you'll get into trouble. I do have the manual of a technique. Golden Liberation Technique probably wasn't an excellent technique, but Lu Yi had no other options. By the way, you just mentioned Cloud River Realm. Is it a kind of cultivator realm? He remembered that when he was inside the tent, third senior brother mentioned Real Lake Realm and Divine Ocean Realm, which he had never heard of. During his 1-year stay in the mine, he rarely talked to anyone and he had no friends. All the information he learned about cultivation was hearsay, which was why it was fragmented. Yes, Yu Xiaotaya nodded. For the cultivators, there are 4 major cultivation realms, which are Spirit Creek Realm, Cloud River Realm, Real Lake Realm, and Divine Ocean Realm. There are 9 orders in every major realm. Creek, River, Lake, and Ocean. The categorization is interesting and straightforward. Are we in the Spirit Creek Realm then? Lu Yi asked. With a smile, Yu Xiaotaya shook her head and replied, not yet. We're just people who have been enlightened. We have to unlock more spiritual points so that our own spiritual power can pass through these points and form a cosmic orbit circulation. Only when our spiritual power passes through the points like the flow in the creek can we be regarded as Spirit Creek Realm Masters, and we'll have the right to be called cultivators then. Lu Yi asked in shock, you mean we're not cultivators yet? Then what are we? Cultivators to be? Yu Xiaotaya tilted her head, which made her look adorable. All right. Lu Yi accepted that he was just a cultivator to be. He thought that he was already considered a cultivator since he had been enlightened. However, now it seemed that he was still too naive. Realizing that he had no basic knowledge of the cultivation world, Yu Xiaotaya decided to tell him more about it. There are countless sects in Zhouzhou. If we're talking about Bingzhou alone, there are more than 1,000 sects and clans of different sizes. A sect is considered strong or weak based on their inner disciples' cultivations. If the inner disciples are in a higher realm, the sect will be considered powerful. Moreover, these sects are tiered as well. Oh, how are they tiered? Lu Ye's interest was piqued. He had figured out that she was trying to tell him the basic knowledge of the cultivation world, so he wouldn't let this chance slip through his fingers. Every major realm of a cultivator is divided into 9 orders. Sects are divided into 9 tiers as well. The 9th tier is the lowest, and the 1st tier is the best. I'm not sure how they're actually categorized, but there are definitely top cultivators in the Divine Ocean Realm in the 1st to 3rd tier sect. I remember that the number of such cultivators is taken into consideration as well. For 4th tier to 6th tier sects, there have to be enough Real Lake Realm Masters. For the 7th tier to 9th tier sects, they only need some Cloud River Realm Masters. What about those with only Spirit Creek Realm Masters? Lu Yi asked curiously. Yu Xiaotaya pressed her lips together and smiled. Spirit Creek Realm Masters have no right to found a sect. Lu Yi started flushing as he felt that he was so ignorant. Yu Xiaotaya went on to say, in Bingzhou we have 10 first-tier sects, and they're collectively called 1 palace, 2 temples, 3 sects and 4 clans. 1 palace refers to Auspicious Cloud Palace. 2 temples are Yama Temple and Rainbow Temple. 3 sects are Righteous Sect, Green Jade Sect and Rasho Sect. 4 clans are Infinity Clan, Scarlet Moon Clan, Northern Profound Sword Clan and Sky Origin Clan. Grand Sky Coalition and Thousand Demon Ridge respectively occupy half of them. There are many Divine Ocean Realm Masters in each sect. Lu Yi recalled that third senior brother told him that Green Jade Sect was one of the top 5 sects in Bingzhou when it came to comprehensive power. At that time, he thought that the sect was indeed highly ranked, but he hadn't expected that it was actually so powerful. There were more than 1,000 sects in Bingzhou, so the Green Jade Sect was truly incredible if it could rise above others and become one of the top 10 sects. This time, in order to launch an attack on Evil Moon Valley, Grand Sky Coalition has sent a deputy coalition leader. He is from Righteous Sect. Is the deputy coalition leader surnamed Pang? Lu Yi nonchalantly asked. I'm not sure. How do you know? I just heard it from somewhere. Lu Yi did not explain it in detail. It seems that Evil Moon Valley is pretty formidable. 2 out of 10 first-tier sects, Righteous Sect and Green Jade Sect, have come together to destroy Evil Moon Valley. Yu Xiaotaya replied with a smile, That's not how you should judge their power. Although Evil Moon Valley is fairly powerful, it's still not comparable to a first-tier sect. I think it should be around 5th tier or 6th tier. Although 2 top sects have come together, not everyone in the first-tier sects is a top cultivator. You're right. Lu Yi agreed with her. Yu Xiaotaya went on to say, besides the 2 first-tier sects, we still have some other sects. The test is almost over. Anyone with a jade tablet has a chance to join one of those sects. Brother Lu, you mustn't miss this chance. Aptitude and talent tests were just to pick out people who could cultivate. Joining one of those sects to cultivate and learn new techniques was the real opportunity. It wasn't that these sects lacked disciples. First-tier sects like Righteous Sect and Green Jade Sect were never lacking disciples. They had somewhat agreed upon such a way to take in disciples. For people like Lu Yi and Yu Xiaotaya who had been rescued, even though the world was big, they had nowhere else to go. Therefore, Grand Sky Coalition had to help them settle down and help those with the aptitude to cultivate to join one of the sects. They wouldn't suffer any losses anyway. Perhaps they could even find some highly talented people. Lu Yi put on a smile. I guess no sect will take in someone like me who has only 1 leave. You should look on the bright side. Yu Xiaotaya consoled him. Your advantage is that you've been enlightened. There are about 10 sects that have come over. I'm sure you'll be able to join one of them. Thanks for your kind words. Humanity's Great Sage, Chapter 15, Pang Dehai and Lu Ye's Sincerity. You have to be careful when selecting a sect. If you manage to join a proper sect, your wish might be granted. A voice was suddenly heard saying from the side. Lu Yi and Yu Xiaotaya turned around in shock, only to see that a fatty had appeared beside them when they were not paying attention. Currently, he was looking at them with a smile, and his eyes were small because of his chubby face. He was the one who had registered the slaves and examined their identities previously. Lu Yi was stunned because he didn't even realize when the fatty had come over. Senior brother. Yu Xiaotaya hurriedly saluted him with a solemn expression. Although she had unlocked some spiritual points, a cultivator like the fatty was still a powerful figure to her, which was why she was anxious. Lu Yi saluted him as well. I heard you chatting happily, which was why I came over to have a look. Do you mind? With an amiable expression, the fat cultivator clapped his own bulging stomach with one hand. We wouldn't dare to. Yu Xiaotaya quickly waved her hands. Although she was nervous, she remained clear-headed as she realized that this was a chance to get some information from him. Senior brother, what did you mean when you said that? Although she knew more about the cultivation world than Lu Yi, her knowledge was limited. Certainly, she wasn't comparable to a formal cultivator from Grand Sky Coalition like the fat cultivator in this regard. Of course I mean it literally. Do you want to know more? The grin on the fat cultivator's face widened. Even though he was replying to her, his gaze was actually fixed on Lu Yi. Lu Yi didn't understand why the fatty was staring at him, but he could feel that the latter was ill-intentioned. However, since it had something to do with his future, he still decided to reply in a respectful manner. Senior brother, please enlighten us. If you want to know, the fat cultivator hospitably clapped Lu Ye's shoulder. That'll depend on how sincere you are. How sincere I am. Lu Yi arched his brow as he recalled that the first time he met this fat cultivator, the latter was staring at the storage bag on his waist. No way. It can't be. He's a cultivator with profound cultivation, so it's unlikely that he has his eye on a nobody like me. However, the meaning behind his words is obvious. Anyone who isn't a fool would understand it. After a moment of silence, he decided to lift his hand and snuck it under the storage bag on his waist, only to see that the fat cultivator slightly opened his eyes and widened his grin. After that, he lowered his hand, and the cultivator's expression became normal. Then, he lifted his hand again, and the cultivator also widened his eyes. After doing it for a few times, he could finally confirm that the truth was exactly what he had imagined. The fat cultivator couldn't take it anymore as he had never seen someone like Lu Yi, who so brazenly tried to mess with him. Displeased, he swung his sleeve and uttered, "It seems that you don't want to know." Right after he turned around, he felt a weight in his hand. Lowering his head, he realized that there was a bottle of chi blood pills in his hand. and Lu Ye's expression was that of a man who had some of his flesh cut off. The corners of the fat cultivator's mouth twitched. Is this how you show me your sincerity? What the hell is this? I did not come all the way here for this rubbish. Senior brother, what do you want, then? Lu Yi asked. Unable to take it anymore, the fat cultivator directly revealed his intention. The mineral ores. Lu Yi asked curiously, why is someone as powerful as you interested in those mineral ores? The fat cultivator explained, you may not be aware that the mineral ores that are excavated from the Evil Moon Valley's mine are all exquisite and rare items. Moreover, if you want to get some information from me, you have to pay a price. We're not friends, so there's no reason for me to tell you anything for free. You're right. Lu Yi nodded in agreement as he randomly fished out a mineral ore from his storage bag and passed it to him. The fat cultivator did not immediately take it. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and shook his head. I don't see your sincerity. But it's huge. Lu Yi pointed at the washbasin-sized mineral ore. It was the largest mineral ore in his storage bag. Ignoring him, the fat cultivator started humming a song. Lu Yi couldn't help but click his tongue. With a conflicted expression, he put down the mineral ore on the ground and took out one more mineral ore. He had been inside the mine for more than a year, so he knew a thing or two about these mineral ores. Although he wasn't sure their exact value, he reckoned that the ones that were easily found were normally cheaper. Although the 2 mineral ores he had taken out were huge, they were not rare inside the mine. In fact, they were easily found. There were only a small number of mineral ores in Zhou Cheng's storage bag, which were about 5 to 6 pieces, and they were the most common ones. On the other hand, not only were there a lot of mineral ores in Manager Yang's bag, but there were also a lot of rare ones. The fat cultivator finally sported a smile when he saw the second mineral ore. Brat, don't think that I'm taking advantage of you. It's just that I find you to be likable, which is why I've come all the way here to give you some advice. I Peng Dahai from Righteous Sect, am quite famous in the cultivation world in Bingzhou. Normally, I wouldn't bother to give other people advice even if they wanted me to. Seeing what the fat cultivator was doing in broad daylight, and that he even claimed to be from Righteous Sect, Yu Xiaotaya felt that something in her heart had broken into pieces. Lu Yi also found it unbearable. Are you sure you are from Righteous Sect? He's not righteous in any way. As he spoke, he fished out the third mineral ore. However, Peng Dahai's eyes remained narrowed, apparently still not content with what he saw. The corners of Lu Ye's eyes twitched as he had the urge to pry open the fatty's eyes to make him see clearly. Unfortunately, he was no match for him. When he took out the fourth mineral ore, he selected the precious yuan metal. Peng Dahai's brows twitched as he kept a smile on his face. Lu Yi clapped his hands and pointed at the 4 mineral ores on the ground. Is my sincerity enough now? A smiling Peng Dahai did not respond to him. All right, there's no choice then. Lu Yi heaved a sigh, and as Peng Dahai and Yu Xiaotaya stared at him in shock, he crouched down and put the first mineral ore back into his storage bag. Then, he looked up at Peng Dahai and asked, Is it enough? Peng Dahai widened his eyes and stared at him in disbelief. At the same time, he was flustered. Yu Xiaotaya was also stunned by Lu Ye's action, as she didn't understand what he was trying to achieve. Then Lu Yi put the second mineral ore back into his bag and lifted his head before asking, Is it enough? Peng Dahai seemed to have the urge to scold him, but he refrained from doing it to show that he had the demeanor of a top cultivator. However, his expression suggested that he was exasperated. When Lu Yi was reaching out to the third mineral ore, he felt a grab on his shoulder. He lifted his head, only to see that Peng Dahai was glowering at him and saying through clenched teeth, Enough. That's enough. Humanity's Great Sage, Chapter 16, Peng Dahai's Advice. A moment later, Peng Dahai took the 2 mineral ores and uttered, Brat, you're pretty interesting. A flabbergasted Yu Xiaotaya was standing on the side. Seeing that rather than getting angry, Peng Dahai was grinning from ear to ear, she didn't understand what was on his mind. Since Lu Yi had shown enough sincerity, Peng Dahai uttered in a straightforward manner, A cultivator has to cultivate for life, so when you're starting out, you'd better select a direction based on your attribute or talent. Certainly, I'm not talking about the talent that you were tested just now, but your compatibility with a particular cultivation faction. A cultivation faction? Lu Yi sensitively caught the most important point, but he was doubtful. Isn't he supposed to give us advice on how to select a sect? Why is he talking about cultivation factions? That's right. I'm going to talk about cultivation factions. Peng Dehai nodded. There were a lot of strange cultivation factions in the cultivation world of Zhou in the past, but only a small number of them remain to this day. There are 6 main cultivation factions, which are body tempering, combat, spells, medicine, ghost, and the external cultivation faction, which encompasses refining pills, drawing talisman papers, setting up arrays, and making weapons. Certainly, some smaller cultivation factions have survived, but they're not commonly seen. You'll find out about them if you happen to come across them. It can be said that 99% of the cultivators belong to one of the 6 cultivation factions, and it has determined the area they have to work on. If you've chosen the right cultivation faction, it'll be much easier for you to cultivate. For example, if someone is born to be strong and burly, he'll choose the body tempering cultivation faction. If someone is excellent at spells, he'll go down the path of spell cultivation faction. If someone doesn't like to kill or fight with other people, he can learn to refine pills or save lives. They're all suitable choices, so choosing the right cultivation faction is important. If someone wants to learn how to wield a sword but he's joined 100 Flower Valley, no one can teach him anything. Lu Yi and Yu Xiaotaya nodded repeatedly as they listened to Peng Dehai's introduction. Even Yu Xiaotaya had never heard of such information. Based on what you've said, different sects place emphasis on different cultivation factions, right? Lu Yi could somewhat grasp what Peng Dehai was saying. Have I ever said that? Peng Dehai was shocked. You just said that people from 100 Flower Valley don't teach their disciples how to use a sword. You're quite clever. Peng Dehai gave him an approving look. He had never expected that Lu Yi could deduce something from what he had said. Normally, there wouldn't only be a single cultivation faction in a sect. There are 2 to 3 at the very least. Some of the sects even have 4, 5 and even more cultivation factions. For example, the 10 first-tier sects have all the major cultivation factions. However, there is an exception. Northern Profound Sword Sect only has 1 cultivation faction, which is Combat Cultivation Faction, and they can be pretty extreme. At the mention of the sect, his chubby face twitched as though he had recalled some unpleasant memories. He paused for a moment before continuing to say, although a sect is made up of a few cultivation factions, they'll still emphasize a particular one. This situation is prevalent in the lower-tier sects. That's because they don't have enough energy and resources to focus on so many cultivation factions at the same time. For example, we have some people from Burning Moon Mountain with us this time, and they're focused on Pill Cultivation Faction, which is a part of external cultivation. The pills they've produced are famous in Bingzhou. People whose main attribute is fire are in an advantageous position if they want to join Burning Moon Mountain because fire attribute spiritual power is needed to refine pills. He took a look at Lu Yi when he said the last sentence, so it was apparent what he was trying to say. Upon hearing his explanation, Lu Yi asked, "Is this what you mean, that we should choose a cultivation faction based on our own attribute?" That's right. Peng Dehai nodded. People whose main attribute is gold are generally more aggressive, so they can go with combat, spell and body tempering cultivation factions. Wood is all about vitality, so people with this attribute can go with body tempering, medicine, spells, pills and even arrays. People whose main attribute is water are soft and tolerant of all things in the world, so they can go with all sorts of cultivation factions. People with a fire attribute are violent, so besides medicine and ghost cultivation factions, they're compatible with the rest. People with an earth attribute are generally strong, so they can go with body tempering. The path you want to take not only depends on your interests but also your attributes. The mortals have a saying that the biggest mistake a man can make is going down the wrong path. And it's true for cultivators as well. Now that everyone has gone through the test, someone will distribute some stuff to all of you. It has got something to do with whether you will stay or go, so you have to choose carefully. Before you join any sect, you'd better find out which cultivation faction the sect is focused on, and whether it will clash with your own attribute. Got it? Lu Yi nodded with a serious expression and cupped his fists. Thanks, senior brother. Peng Dehai might appear to be greedy, But after taking 2 mineral ores from Lu Yi, he indeed gave him some useful information that the latter hadn't heard of before. Hence, his information was worth the 2 mineral ores. Then Peng Dehai waved his hand. It's just common knowledge. You've rarely come into contact with other people, which is why you don't know. Senior brother, since my main attribute is fire and my supporting attribute is gold, which sect should I go to? Huh? You? Peng Dehai sized him up and grinned. I think you'll not be accepted by any sect. Lu Ye's expression darkened in an instant. Then why did you tell me so much just now? An elated Peng Dehai replied, I've heard that there's one guy whose talent is only 1 leaf, which is why I've come over to see a rare creature like you. Do you know that you're the first one with a single leaf that I've seen over the years? Ha ha ha. All his flesh was convulsing when he laughed. Lu Yi had the urge to pounce on him and beat him to a pulp. Who is the bastard that exposed my talent to everyone? Bad news does spread around quickly. Just when Lu Yi was about to explode, Peng Dehai suddenly stopped laughing and uttered to him in a lowered voice, If I were you, I'd lower my expectation and not be irresolute. By doing so, you may stand a chance to have your wish granted. Upon finishing his words, he turned to look at Yu Xiaotaya and said, smiling, Young girl, do you need my advice? Certainly, Yu Xiaotaya badly needed that, so she quickly asked, Senior brother, which sect do you think I should join? Do you love to fight and kill? Peng Dehai questioned. Yu Xiaotaya shook her head like a pellet drum as no girls like to fight and kill. Go to 100 Flower Valley then, Peng Dehai uttered. Most of them focus on medicine so they don't need to go to any battles. Furthermore, even if they're captured, they'll not be treated harshly. 100 Flower Valley. Yu Xiaotaya fell into her thoughts for a moment before she saluted him. Thanks, senior brother. Her main attribute was wood, so 100 Flower Valley did suit her. Peng Dehai must be aware of that, which was why he gave her this advice. After Peng Dehai left, Lu Yi remained in the same spot with a terrible mood. Yu Xiaotaya wanted to console him, but she did not know what to say, so she decided to change the topic by uttering, Brother Lu, there's something I don't understand. What is it? Senior brother Peng did not take your mineral ores when there were 4, but why did he accept them after you took away 2 ores? Lu Yi nonchalantly explained, to him, all 4 ores belonged to him, which was why he didn't treasure them. Only after losing them would he understand that they were valuable. Upon hearing that, Yu Xiaotaya fell into her thoughts as she felt that he was right. Certainly, it had something to do with the fact the 2 mineral ores that Lu Yi had taken back were worthless. The valuable mineral ores were the ones that were left behind. Humanity's Great Sage Chapter 17, Applying for a Sect. Peng Dehai had said that someone would give them something and tell them to make a choice. As a cultivator from Righteous Sect, there was no doubt that he knew what would come next. As expected, not long after he was gone, all those who had passed the test and possessed the jade tablets were gathered together. More than 1,000 slaves had been saved, but at this moment only more than 100 people were left, which was 10% of the original number. All of them were standing there in silence. A cultivator walked over and passed a piece of paper to every one of them. Lu Yi took it and had a look, only to see that the names of 10 sects had been written on the paper. Righteous Sect was at the top while Green Jade Sect came next. There were also other sects that Lu Yi had never heard of. Nevertheless, he saw Burning Moon Mountain and 100 Flower Valley, which Peng Dehai had mentioned. These were supposed to be the sects that had come over to launch an attack on Evil Moon Valley. The tier of each sect was marked behind the name. There was no doubt that Righteous Sect and Green Jade Sect were first-tier sects. The tiers of other sects were wildly different, which were mostly 4th to 7th tier. Behind the tier of each sect, there was also a note that stated the cultivation factions that the sect focused on, which was the information Peng Dehai had talked about. At that instant, Lu Yi was somewhat grateful to Peng Dehai. Without his introduction, he wouldn't have been able to understand what was written on the paper. Just when he was poring over the information, a cultivator in the front of the crowd suddenly said, If you want to join any sect, just take a pen from here and draw a circle around the name of the sect. You can choose 3 sects at most. However, which sect you'll eventually join will depend on your luck, and the people in charge of taking in disciples for the respective sects. If you're lucky, you might be able to join one of the 2 first-tier sects. After he finished speaking, the place fell into silence for a moment. Soon someone asked Senior, "Do you mean that while we're selecting a sect, the sect will also choose us?" "That's right," the cultivator replied dispassionately. "So don't expect instant success. If your aptitude and talent are not good enough, it'll be pointless for you to choose first-tier sects." Another person asked, "What if all 3 sects don't take me in?" "Then you're not meant to cultivate, and you'll be handled together with those without the aptitude to cultivate." Upon hearing that, the people who had intended to try their luck became alerted. Many of them had the intention of choosing both first-tier sects. However, if they really did that, the outcome would be disappointing. Be it Righteous Sect or Green Jade Sect, they were strict when it came to taking in disciples. If these people were rejected by those 2 sects, they would only have 1 chance left. If the last chance also slipped through their fingers, they would miss this opportunity to become a cultivator. To people like Lu Yi and the others, joining one of the sects would be the best outcome, so no one wanted to miss this chance. At that instant, all of them became serious. On the other hand, as Lu Yi was holding the paper and listening to the cultivator, his expression turned awkward. "Why does it look like we're applying for a university? After we were tested for our talent, the 3rd senior brother from Green Jade Sect gave us an introduction to the sect. Then the jade tablets we obtained were like test results. These sects are just like universities and cultivation factions are like courses. Now we're all applying for our desired universities. We also have to choose our top 3 universities. As for the sects written on the paper, the top 2 are undoubtedly the best universities. 4th to 5th tier sects are like average universities, while 6th to 7th tier sects are like below average universities." When Lu Yi saw the last name, he was stunned. Why is there also a diploma mill here? The last sect on the list was Crimson Blood Sect, which was a 9th tier sect. He did not notice it at first. The situation was pretty clear by now. The more than 100 people here who had passed the test had to pick 3 sects out of the 10. Although it wasn't so difficult, there was some competition in secret. If too many people chose a particular sect, a large number of candidates would be knocked out. Clenching the jade tablet in his hand, Lu Yi secretly heaved a sigh. His one-leaf talent had put him in a disadvantageous position, but he still had to give it a try. Since his main attribute was fire and his supporting attribute was gold, he had a plan in his mind. There was a desk in front of the cultivator who spoke earlier. Some pens and an ink slab had been put on the table. Then some people stepped forward and picked up the pens to draw on their papers. After that, they passed the papers and their jade tablets to the cultivator. Soon half of the more than 100 people were done with it. Yu Xiaotaya walked over and asked, "Brother Lu, have you made a decision?" "Well, yeah." She went on to say, "Why don't we go together? You'll go first. I still need some time." Lu Yi had actually made a decision, but when he thought about his one-leaf talent, he felt diffident. There were 10 sects and more than 100 people. On average, each sect could accept more than 10 people. However, that was just the ideal allocation. Lu Yi was certain that Righteous Sect and Green Jade Sect wouldn't take in many disciples. Each of them would accept 2 to 3 people at most. In other words, the other sects had to accept more peoples. Lu Yi did not even think about applying for one of the first-tier sects. However, if the competition was too intense, he would still be knocked out even if he applied for those 6th to 7th-tier sects. He had arrived at Zhouzhou more than a year ago, but he had spent the past year as a mining slave for Evil Moon Valley. Although he had been enlightened, he couldn't even find the second spiritual point. So, how was he going to cultivate? Nevertheless, it would be a different story if he could join a sect. By then, he could ask one of the top cultivators from the sect to give him some guidance. Whatever the case, he wouldn't want to miss this chance, even if his starting point was worse than that of the others. With this thought in mind, he stepped forward and picked up a pen from the desk. First of all, he drew a circle around the name of Crimson Blood Sect. It was a sect with the lowest tier. Lu Yi reckoned that he was probably the only one who would choose it. Hence, this was a safe choice for him to ensure that he could join a sect. After that, he attempted to draw a circle around the name of Burning Moon Mountain. However, as soon as the tip of his pen came into contact with the paper, He suddenly recalled what Pang Dehai had said to him. The fatty told him that he should lower his expectations and should not be irresolute. Only by doing so could his wish be granted. At that time he didn't understand what Pang Dehai meant. He thought that it was just a piece of advice for him. However, now it seemed that there was a hidden message in his words. Furthermore, Pang Dehai did not have any high hopes for him. When Lu Yi asked him which sect to choose, he directly told Lu Yi that none of the sects would choose him. After all, he was a cultivator from righteous sect. Although he was greedy, there was no reason for him to mess with Lu Yi. In other words, even if Lu Yi also chose other sects, he probably wouldn't get into any one of them. Then he closed his eyes as he knew that every decision at the crossroads of life was utterly important, especially the one right in front of him. Suddenly, he lifted his head and gazed at the cultivator before asking, "Senior brother, what if I only choose this sect?" The cultivator looked curiously at him because no one had chosen Crimson Blood sect before Lu Yi did, and it could be expected that no one would pick the sect after him. That was because the sect was of the lowest tier. What the cultivator hadn't expected was that not only did Lu Yi choose Crimson Blood sect, but he had also asked such a question. The cultivator stroked his mustache and grinned. "You'll find out about it after you do it." Humanity's Great Sage. Chapter 18, Elder Tang's Dilemma. To lower his expectation, Lu Yi should probably choose the lowest tier sect. To show that he wasn't irresolute, he should only make one choice. If Lu Yi wasn't mistaken, that was what Pang Dehai meant when he said those words to him. The most important question for Lu Yi now was whether he should trust him. After giving it a thought, he made up his mind and put down the pen on the table. Then, he passed the paper and his jade tablet to the mustachioed cultivator. "Senior brother, I've made a decision." The cultivator arched his brow. "Do you need more time to think it over?" Lu Yi looked down and uttered, "There's no need." His talent was indeed outrageously low, so it was pointless for him to choose other sects. In that case, he would rather place all his hopes on Crimson Blood sect. Pang Dehai did not have a reason to mess with him. After all, he had given him 2 mineral ores. All right. The mustachioed cultivator nodded before he stored Lu Yi's paper and jade tablet. Then he took a look at the tablet. "Oh, you are Lu Yi the One Leaf." "My name is just Lu Yi, senior brother." The corners of his eyes twitched. "All right, Lu Yi the One Leaf." The mustachioed cultivator smiled at him as he emphasized one leaf. At that instant, Lu Yi had the urge to scold him. He already had a nickname before he even ventured into the cultivation world, so how was he going to face other people? Also, who had spread the news that his talent was only one leaf? A moment later, the mustachioed cultivator stored all their papers and shot into the sky. Then, he turned into a beam of light and flew towards the middle of a mountain in the east. There were many palaces in that location. The palaces were the residences of those cultivators from Evil Moon Valley, but they had become a temporary base for those from Grand Sky Coalition now. Many cultivators kept entering and leaving the base. There were also a lot of items that had been collected and pending allocation. The mustachioed cultivator directly flew towards the innermost palace. There was already a female cultivator waiting outside the palace. Seeing him, the woman asked, "Is everything ready?" The mustachioed cultivator replied, "All the papers are here. Just give them to me. The representatives are talking about retreating from this place. After they're done with the discussion, I'll pass them the papers." "Are we going to retreat so soon?" The mustachioed cultivator was shocked. The female cultivator replied, "Those from Thousand Demon Ridge have reacted quicker than we expected. Some of their sects are gathering together, so we have to leave this place quickly." Upon hearing her explanation, the mustachioed cultivator nodded. Although many people from Grand Sky Coalition had come over, they were in the territory of Thousand Demon Ridge after all. If they got into a war again, the other party could continuously summon more people, which would put Grand Sky Coalition in a disadvantageous position. Since Evil Moon Valley had been destroyed and they had gained a lot of benefits, it was the right time to leave. After passing the pile of papers to the woman, the mustachioed cultivator quickly left the place. The female cultivator waited outside the hall for a moment before a loud voice could be heard coming from inside. "Come in." Upon hearing that, she quickly pushed the door open. There were only 10 people in the hall who were the representatives of the 10 sects that had come over to destroy Evil Moon Valley. The person at the front was an upright-looking and authoritative person, who was Pang Zhan from Righteous Sect. He was also the deputy coalition leader of Grand Sky Coalition. He was the most powerful cultivator among these people as he was in the Divine Ocean realm. The woman walked up to Pang Zhan and respectfully put down the pile of papers before saying, "I'll take my leave now." After she was gone, Pang Zhan flipped through the pile of papers and picked out only one. Then, he passed the rest to the representative of Green Jade Sect. For Lu Yi and other people, every piece of paper carried their future and dreams. However, to people like Pang Zhan, these papers were not worth their attention. Every time they attacked the territories occupied by Thousand Demon Ridge, they would save some people, and taking in the ones with the aptitude and talent to cultivate was just something they had agreed upon. Each of these sects had thousands of disciples. If a person's aptitude and talent were not particularly outstanding, no one would bother to spare them a glance. Apparently, among the people that had been saved this time, no one was worth their attention. As the more than 100 papers passed through the hands of these representatives, the number of the papers decreased. When the papers were in the hands of 100 Flower Valley's representative, he picked out more than 10 people. Just when he was about to pass the papers to the next one, he seemed to have discovered something interesting as he looked at an old man at the back of the row. "Elder Tang, someone has chosen Crimson Blood Sect." Upon hearing that, Pang Zhan, who was speaking to the representative of Green Jade Sect, couldn't help but lift his head. "Are you serious?" He had just randomly picked one person out of more than 100 people, so he did not pay attention to the other candidates. Other people appeared surprised as well. Someone even said with a smile, "It seems that this person is pretty astute compared to the others." Judging from his words, it was as if choosing Crimson Blood Sect was an incredible decision. The person at the back of the row who was called Elder Tang was the old man who had brought Lu Yi out of the mine. Upon hearing that, Elder Tang was surprised as well. Their sect had joined many such operations before, but no one had selected their sect even though those who had been saved were given 3 choices. That was because Crimson Blood Sect was of the lowest tier. Any ambitious and aggressive people wouldn't choose this sect. Although he was surprised, Elder Tang still waved his hand. "You're aware that we don't take in any disciples. If it weren't because of the coalition's rules, the name of Crimson Blood Sect wouldn't even have appeared on the paper." Upon hearing that, the representative from 100 Flower Valley uttered, "I'm afraid you can't reject him, Elder Tang. He has only chosen Crimson Blood Sect, and no one else has picked your sect." A shocked Elder Tang extended his hand. "Let me see it." After taking the remaining papers from the representative of 100 Flower Valley, Elder Tang pored over the papers and realized that, just like what the representative had said, the person had only chosen his sect. Lu Yi. Gazing at the name on the jade tablet, Elder Tang immediately recalled the young man that he had come across in the mine, so he was surprised that the young man had chosen his sect. The representative from 100 Flower Valley uttered, "According to the rules in such a situation, it's mandatory for you to accept this person." There was indeed such a rule in the coalition. Grand Sky Coalition would give 3 chances to those who had been saved. However, if a person only chose one sect, the selected sect had to take the person in. The prerequisite was that no one else had made the same choice. This rule was to give those who were determined to cultivate a chance. Only a small number of representatives from the sects were aware of this rule, so there was no way that those former slaves could find out about it. This guy, Elder Tang, appeared helpless. The fact that Lu Yi had chosen his sect seemed to have put him in a tight spot. "Elder Tang, it's time you took in a disciple." The representative from 100 Flower Valley persuaded him. Then he changed the topic. "Although this guy has been enlightened, his talent leaves much to be desired." "So what if his talent is low?" "It doesn't mean anything. You all have cultivated for years, so haven't you come to this realization? Have you ever seen someone with one-leaf talent? That's terrible. How was he even enlightened?" Since he's made such a decision, there's no reason for Crimson Blood Sect to turn him down. I'm worried that those from Cinnabar Heart Sect will. At the mention of Cinnabar Heart Sect, All of them fell silent as if there was something that had stopped them from talking about it. Rules are rules. If those from Cinnabar Heart Valley are not happy with it, they can come at me. Pang Jun, who had remained silent for a long time, suddenly landed a slap on the table. Elder Tang, just take him in. Although a person with one leaf talent isn't worth nurturing, this might be a chance to save your sect. Elder Tang clenched Lu Ye's jade tablet in his hand for a moment before he uttered, "I'll think about it." Humanity's Great Sage Chapter 19 The Result. After making a decision, Lu Yi was finally at ease. He had always been an optimistic man. When he was captured by Evil Moon Valley and became a mining slave, he was able to accept the truth quickly. Presently, things wouldn't go any worse. The worst he could get was losing the chance to join any sect. Since the results would be ready soon, the people who had applied for their favorite sects did not go away. Instead, they remained in the same place and waited quietly. On the other hand, the cultivators inside the valley became busy all of a sudden as they flew in the sky and moved between the peaks. Lu Yi did not know what they were doing, but there seemed to be an emergency. However, he was just a budding cultivator whose fate was yet to be determined, so he wasn't in any place to worry about it. When the mustachioed cultivator, who had collected their papers earlier, reappeared half a day later, Lu Yi knew that the results were ready. The mustachioed cultivator walked up to them with a list of names in his hand, and upon making sure that everyone had their focus on him, he yelled, "Righteous Sect, Chui de Yuan." When a burly young man heard his name, he was startled for a moment before he leaped into the air and exclaimed as excitement was written all over his face. The people around him shot him envious looks, and his friends congratulated him. Without stopping, the mustachioed cultivator ignored the commotion and went on to announce, "Green Jade Sect, Lutiani Dongpang. Rarewood Mountain Zhaowen Lin Tangan I Gaorui. Burning Moon Mountain." He wasn't speaking in a loud voice, but no matter how rowdy the people were, his voice could be clearly heard by everyone. As the sects and names were announced, those who heard their names became over the moon because it meant that they would not have to become mining slaves again and had the capital to change their fates. Unlike in the past, they would no longer be powerless to resist oppression. At the back of the crowd, Lu Yi was quietly listening to the announcement with a calm expression. Unlike the anxious people around him, his composure seemed out of place. Just like what he had predicted, the first-tier sects did not take in a lot of disciples. Righteous Sect only accepted one person while Green Jade Sect only took in 2 people. They had taken in disciples for the sake of doing it. The 4th to 7th tier sects were the ones that accepted most people. The lower tier the sect was, the more people they would accept. One of the sects had even taken in more than 20 people. Yu Xiao Tai's name was mentioned as well, and she was going to join 100 Flower Valley with some other people. She was so agitated that her face started flushing, but there was no one who could share her joy. More sects had been announced, and those who hadn't got their names mentioned became increasingly fidgety. Finally, after the last name was announced, the mustachioed cultivator put away the paper and uttered, "Those who have been accepted by the respective sects should wait on the same spot. Your senior brothers and senior sisters will come over and take you with them. I hope that after you join the sects, you'll cultivate diligently and aspire to join forces with me to battle against our enemies one day." Senior brother, was that the last? Someone asked in a shaking voice. Apparently, his name hadn't been mentioned. There were 10 people whose names had not been mentioned, including the one who uttered earlier. It meant that they had lost the chance to join a sect and start cultivating. At this moment, most of them were crestfallen, and one woman even started sobbing. Lu Yi was among the 10 people, but he did not appear dejected at all. He had made a decision by choosing only the lowest tier Crimson Blood sect. Since he wasn't even selected in this case, it meant that there wouldn't be any positive outcome no matter what choices he made. He had heard that a cultivator without a sect could become a rogue cultivator. However, without a sect's protection, it'd be difficult for the person to cultivate on their own. The upside was that he was free and no one would restrict him. At the thought of this, he realized that it was actually a good option. Furthermore, he still had the skill tree, which was an unfair advantage that the others did not possess. While he was in his wild thoughts, The mustachioed cultivator lifted his head as his gaze traversed the crowd and fixed on a particular spot in the distance. In that direction, an old man was standing there as he stared fixedly at Lu Yi. He was none other than Elder Tang. He had already appeared when the mustachioed cultivator started making an announcement as he secretly observed Lu Yi. Due to some special reasons, Crimson Blood Sect had not taken in any disciples in the past 30 years. If he accepted anyone at this point all of a sudden, he would get on the nerves of some people. However, if it was this disciple whose talent was only one leaf, it seemed to be all right. With such terrible talent, he was destined to be unable to achieve anything in the future, and it wouldn't alert some particular people. Elder Tang did not want to take in any disciple, but he couldn't reject the coalition's rule, so he was in a dilemma. That was why he decided to personally come over to observe Lu Yi. There was no doubt that Lu Yi was a little special among the more than 100 people. Those who heard their names would exclaim in surprise, and those who did not have their names mentioned would become dejected. However, only he was standing there in silence throughout the process. Recalling the first time he met Lu Yi inside the dark mine, Elder Tang heaved a sigh, and under the mustachioed cultivator's attention, he nodded gently. He could not ignore the coalition's rule, so he decided to accept Lu Yi for now. In the future, he could make a request with his friends and send him to one of the sects. Upon getting Elder Tang's reply, the mustachioed cultivator put on a smile and gazed at the person who had asked him a question earlier. By the way, there's one more sect. With a solemn expression he yelled, Crimson Blood Sect, Lu Yi. Lu Ye's mind was already elsewhere when he heard his name. After he was startled for a moment, he lifted his head and gazed at the mustachioed cultivator. As their eyes met, the mustachioed cultivator uttered with a smile, "Congratulations, Lu Yi the One Leaf." Is he not done with it yet? The corners of Lu Ye's eyes twitched. The mustachioed cultivator went on to say, "All right, it's over. Those whose names have not been mentioned, follow me." "Senior brother." Lu Yi raised his hand and shouted. The mustachioed cultivator turned around. "What?" Staring at him, Lu Yi asked, "Senior brother, what's your name? What's your realm?" The mustachioed cultivator touched his mustache and looked curiously at him. "What's wrong? Do you want to beat me up?" An emotionless Lu Yi replied, "I wouldn't dare to. I'm just grateful to you for what you've done for me." "You're quite ambitious." The mustachioed cultivator giggled. "Listen up then. I'm Lushan from Righteous Sect, and I'm a 7th Order Cloud River Realm Master. Got it?" "He's also from Righteous Sect." Lu Yi nodded. "Got it. All right. Cultivate diligently from now on, Lu Yi the One Leaf." Then Lushan led away those whose names had not been mentioned. At that instant they were all regretful. If they had known this would be the outcome, they would have chosen Crimson Blood Sect. At the very least, they would stand a chance to join the sect, which was much better than the helpless state they were in now. However, they were not aware that if they had also chosen Crimson Blood Sect, Lu Yi would not have been accepted. Crimson Blood Sect had not taken in any disciple for the past 30 years. If it weren't because of the coalition's rule, Elder Tang wouldn't have agreed to it. Humanity's Great Sage Chapter 20 Boarding a Ship. The cultivators from the respective sects came over and took the new disciples away, so the number of people present slowly decreased. Yu Xiaotaya left with a female cultivator from 100 Flower Valley. Before that, she had bid Lu Yi farewell. In just 1 hour all 100 people were gone, leaving only Lu Yi behind. 2 hours later, the people from Crimson Blood Sect were still nowhere to be seen. Lu Yi wondered what was holding them up. Since he had nothing to do, he decided to look for a clean place and took a seat with his legs crossed before he attempted to unlock the second spiritual point. His first spiritual point had been filled and he had mastered the Golden Liberation technique, which he had obtained from Manager Yang. However, since he couldn't find the second spiritual point, his progress was held up. Yu Xiaotaya had told him that this was a common problem facing cultivators who had just started out. That was because cultivators like them did not have enough spiritual power to locate their own spiritual points. There were 2 ways to solve this problem. One of them was to try their luck and slowly explore it. The other way was to ask a cultivator who was at least in the Cloud River realm to give them some guidance. This was the main reason Lu Yi wanted to join a sect. During his time in the mine, he had made several attempts to locate his second spiritual point but to no avail. If he could join a sect and ask a senior to lend him a hand, it would save him lots of trouble. However, no one from Crimson Blood sect had yet to appear. Since Lu Yi had nothing to do, he decided to try his luck. It would only take him some spiritual power, but if he was lucky enough to locate the second spiritual point, his power would increase significantly. 2 hours later, he opened his eyes with a frustrated expression. It seemed that luck truly had nothing to do with him. He had failed in his attempt again. Fortunately, he had been given enough food recently and he still had some chi blood pills, so he had ample vitality in his body. He just had to refine some vitality to make up for his losses. At this moment, more cultivators were moving around the valley. It seemed that they were going to gather in the same place, and judging from this situation, it was apparent that they were going to retreat. Before Manager Yang passed away, he had told Lu Yi that Grand Sky Coalition couldn't stay in this place for a long time as they would have to retreat in just 1 to 2 months. It seemed that what he had said was true. Hence, if Manager Yang could kill Lu Yi and hide inside the secret passageway, he would have stood a chance to escape from death's door. However, he had never expected that a commoner like Lu Yi had the guts to set him up by bringing him to a place where he was engulfed in Yuan Metal Force Field, causing him to be unable to use his power. He still did not understand how he ended up getting killed by someone like Lu Yi. Just then someone could be heard shouting from a nearby place. Lu Yi turned to look at the source of the voice and saw a middle-aged cultivator floating in the air. Spiritual power could be seen undulating around him as a thing appeared from his palm. There was still some distance between Lu Yi and the cultivator. Before he could make out what it was, he would soon see a sight that he would never forget. The thing that flew out of the middle-aged cultivator's palm expanded along with the wind as it turned into a gigantic object in a short time and hovered in midair. It was a huge ship that was floating in the air. The ship had 3 floors and was 300 meters long. Its entire body was dark, so it was difficult to tell what material it was made of. The outline of the ship was smooth, and the things that were embedded around the ship gave off an eerie feeling. Lu Yi had never seen anything as bizarre as this before, so he was rooted to the spot. In fact, it wasn't the only ship. Not long after, the middle-aged cultivator made a ship appear out of thin air. More ships continued to appear. Following that, someone shouted, "Everyone from the various sects, board the ships now." Then, the cultivators from different sects who had gathered in the same place turned into colorful beams of lights and shot towards the ships. Looking from afar, the sight was truly magnificent. After recovering from his shock, Lu Yi could feel the emotions in his heart undulate. He had been in this place for more than a year. Although he was aware that this was a cultivation world, he had spent most of his time with mineral ores. Furthermore, the people around him were all lowly mining slaves who could lose their lives at any moment. Hence, he had never expected cultivation techniques to be displayed to him in such a colorful manner one day, which was beyond what he could comprehend. It also made him clearly realize that this world was different to the one he came from. It's magnificent, right? Just when he was dazzled by the splendid sight, someone was heard speaking next to him. Lu Yi subconsciously grunted in response, but he soon realized something and turned his head, only to see an old man standing beside him when he wasn't paying attention. With a faint smile, the old man ran his fingers through his beard. As he gazed at the ships that were floating in the air, he said slowly, "These are Grand Sky Coalition's flying dragon boats, which are useful in occupying cities and destroying fortresses. So, they would only use these ships when it's absolutely necessary." Looking at the old man's profile, Lu Yi recognized that the old man was the one who brought him out of the mine. Recalling how others called him, he immediately saluted him. "Elder Tang." In response, Elder Tang put on a smile and beckoned to him. "Let's go." "Where are we going?" Lu Yi was puzzled. Elder Tang pointed at one of the ships. "We should board a ship now." Lu Yi replied hesitantly, "But I have to wait for my senior brothers and senior sisters from Crimson Blood sect." All of a sudden, he realized something. "Are you from Crimson Blood sect?" There was no reason for Elder Tang to look for him and even ask him to board a ship, unless he was from Crimson Blood sect. I was held up by some urgent matters. Did you become anxious from all the waiting? Elder Tang asked amiably. He's really from Crimson Blood sect. No, I didn't. Lu Yi was slightly excited. Earlier, it was handsome senior brothers and soft-spoken senior sisters who came over to fetch the other people. However, when it was Lu Ye's turn, it was an old man from Crimson Blood sect that had come over. With that said, the old man was a kind-hearted person. That was because he had helped Lu Yi unlock the restraining lock on Zhou Cheng's storage bag. Although Lu Yi wasn't sure about how powerful Elder Tang was, he didn't have the right to reject him if the latter wanted Zhou Cheng's storage bag. Nevertheless, the old man only took a bottle of dragon tiger pills as his pay and gave the rest to Lu Yi. Let's go. Elder Tang smiled and leaped into the air. Then, Lu Yi felt that he was engulfed in a warm aura before he was sent flying towards one of the flying dragon boats alongside Elder Tang. After they landed on the deck, Elder Tang directly walked into the boat while Lu Yi followed him. There were many rooms inside the boat. At this moment, many people, who were the cultivators from various sects, were passing through the corridors. When they saw Elder Tang, they all saluted him in a respectful manner, which amazed Lu Yi. Crimson Blood sect was just a 9th-tier sect. According to what Yu Xiaotaya had told him, Elder Tang was supposed to be a Cloud River realm master. If he was in the real lake realm, his sect would rank higher than 9th tier. Hence, it seemed that even though Elder Tang wasn't so powerful, he was respected by most people. Does it have something to do with his age? When the young man and old man reached the innermost place, they stopped in their tracks in front of a door. Elder Tang waved his hand, after which a light flashed across the door. Then he pushed the door open and entered the room. Lu Yi followed him closely and closed the door. Upon entering the room, Lu Yi looked around and realized that it was a simple bedroom with minimal decorations. There wasn't a bed or a table, as the only piece of furniture there was in the room was a futon on the ground. There was a window that could not be opened. The rounded window frame was sealed off with a transparent glass, so the view outside could be seen clearly. Humanity's Great Sage, Chapter 21. Opening the book in the wrong way. Inside the room in the flying dragon boat, Lu Yi kept looking around. When he came to his senses, he realized that Elder Tang was already seated on the futon. Hence, he quickly walked over and took a seat in front of him. Sometimes fate was truly intriguing. When Lu Yi met Elder Tang in the mine, he could not have expected that he would join the latter sect one day. Whatever the case, he finally had a place to stay from now on. At the thought of this, he felt warm in his heart. He was left with no choice when he decided to join Crimson Blood sect. However, if Elder Tang was also in the same sect, it wasn't so unacceptable after all. I'm Tang Yifeng, Elder Tang uttered, the 10th sect master of Crimson Blood sect. Upon hearing that, Lu Yi was startled. Although he didn't know much about the cultivation world, he understood what a sect master was. Previously, he had speculated that Elder Tang held an important position within Crimson Blood sect, but he had never expected that the latter was actually the sect master. Therefore, he quickly saluted him. Sect master. Elder Tang nodded. Although I've taken you on as a disciple, we do have some rules in our sect. At the moment, you're just a disciple on paper, not a formal one yet. You have to go through some tests first. I'll not talk about the tests now, as you'll find out about it after you join our sect. Furthermore, given your cultivation now, you're still far from being able to take part in the tests. Lu Yi listened carefully and nodded. I understand. Previously, the mining slaves had to go through some tests if they wanted to join Evil Moon Valley, so Lu Yi wasn't surprised to hear that from Elder Tang. Besides him, those who had been selected by the various sects were also not formal disciples yet. Every sect had their own tests to examine the disciples' temperament, morality, and other aspects. Only by passing the tests could they be considered formal disciples. Crimson Blood sect is located on Mount Ao in Bingzhou. The sect has been around for 1,000 years, and we've nurtured a total number of 63,662 disciples. As for Divine Ocean Realm Masters, there are. As Lu Yi listened to Elder Tang's narration, the history of the sect seemed to be unfolding like a scroll right in front of him, allowing him to understand the basic information of the sect. At this moment, he still didn't understand what these numbers meant. When he realized how incredible those numbers actually were in the future, he would be amazed. A moment later, Elder Tang stared at him and uttered, "If there's anything you want to know, just ask me straight away." Lu Yi randomly asked a question that he was curious about. "Sect Master, why didn't I see other senior brothers and senior sisters from our sect during the attack on Evil Moon Valley?" He didn't notice when Elder Tang went over to fetch him. However, upon learning that Elder Tang was the sect master of Crimson Blood Sect, he immediately realized something. Elder Tang seemed to be the only one who had come to this place. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been the one to fetch Lu Yi. Any disciple could do the job of welcoming a newbie, so it wouldn't require a sect master to personally show up. "Well," Elder Tang coughed into his fist. "The thing is, we don't have many people in the sect." Upon hearing his explanation, Lu Yi replied, "It means that not many people have joined our sect, and it's on the decline currently." That seemed to be the case as a 9th-tier sect was already at the bottom of the cultivation world in Zhou, so it was difficult for them to recruit any disciples. For example, of the more than 100 mining slaves that had been rescued, only Lu Yi had chosen Crimson Blood Sect, and the reason he did that was due to Pang Dehai's advice. "Well, you're not wrong to say that." Elder Tang appeared helpless. "Then how many disciples are there in the sect now?" Elder Tang uttered, "Change a topic." "Huh. Don't you have any questions regarding cultivation?" "Yes." Lu Yi nodded hurriedly. "Currently my first spiritual point is full, but I can't find the second one to unlock it. Please give me some guidance." Elder Tang nodded gently. "It's a common problem facing new cultivators. However, if you want to unlock the second spiritual point, you have to obtain a suitable cultivation technique first. I do have a manual." As Lu Yi spoke, he started taking off his clothes, and under the shocked Elder Tang's attention, he fished out his second storage bag from his undershirt. This was Manager Yang's storage bag. Before Lu Yi decided to leave the secret passageway, he had hidden it under his undershirt. There were many valuable things inside the bag, so he was worried that others might have their eyes on it. Since he had joined Crimson Blood Sect, it wasn't necessary to hide it from the sect master anymore. After taking a look at the storage bag on Lu Yi's waist and then the one the young man had just fished out, Elder Tang immediately understood that Lu Yi had killed more than one person from Evil Moon Valley in the mine. "You're such a cunning man," he remarked. With a smirk, Lu Yi took out a book from Manager Yang's bag and passed it to Elder Tang. "I've obtained Golden Liberation Technique from an Evil Moon Valley's cultivator, so I'm not sure if I should cultivate it. Since this is a cultivation technique, you can definitely cultivate it. What are you worried about?" Elder Tang took the book and opened it. "This is a technique from an Evil Moon Valley's cultivator after all, so I'm worried that it might be some kind of evil technique." Lu Yi was unable to finish his words because he suddenly heard some strange noises coming from Elder Tang. In this serene room, the noises sounded unpleasant to the ears. While the corners of Lu Yi's eyes twitched, Elder Tang appeared excited. The noises became increasingly loud as some rhythmic moaning could be heard. There were also some strange conversations. If anyone outside the room heard it, they would think that the people inside the room were engaging in some kind of underhanded activity. Unable to take it anymore, Lu Yi leaned closer to take a look at the book in Elder Tang's hands. As Elder Tang infused his spiritual power into the book, the characters on the pages seemed to have come to life. The noises that Lu Yi could hear were from this book. It wasn't until this moment that he finally realized that he had taken out the wrong book. There were 3 books in Manager Yang's bag in total. One of them was Biographies of Sword Saints, and the other was Golden Liberation Technique. The last book was the one that was in Elder Tang's hands. Lu Yi had randomly fished out a book, but he hadn't expected that this was the one he had taken out. When he went through the book in the past, he realized that the drawings were impeccable and the characters on the pages appeared vivid. However, it had never crossed his mind that the book was actually so amazing. Did I open it in the wrong way previously? That realization made him stunned. While he was in a dazed state, Elder Tang suddenly closed the book. At that instant, all the images and noises disappeared. As their eyes met, Lu Yi uttered, "Sect Master, this book." A solemn Elder Tang replied, "This is a manual of dual cultivation technique, which is pretty useful. However, you're still too young to learn it." No sect master. This is in my book. I obtained it from an evil Moon Valley's cultivator, Lu Yi hurriedly explained. Elder Tang nodded. All right. You're still very young, so I'll keep it for you now. I'll give it back to you when you become older. For some reason, Lu Yi found Elder Tang's words familiar. Elder Tang had kept the amazing book, but there didn't seem to be any storage bag around his body, so Lu Yi wasn't sure where the old man had stored the book. Humanity's Great Sage. Chapter 22. A cultivation technique is neither good nor evil. Elder Tang broke the silence by uttering, "Where's the golden liberation technique that you've just mentioned?" Lu Yi quickly took out the manual from the storage bag and passed it to him. After taking the book, Elder Tang went through it and nodded gently. This is a common yellow rank cultivation technique. If you can cultivate it to the full, you'll be able to unlock 27 spiritual points. Lu Yi could understand what Elder Tang meant by 27 spiritual points, as he had seen that when he was poring over the manual previously. If he could cultivate it fully, he would be able to unlock 27 spiritual points. However, he didn't know what the old man meant by yellow rank, so he voiced his doubt. Elder Tang explained, there are 360 spiritual points in total, which are in sync with the macrocosmic orbit. There are countless cultivation techniques in JoJo, and the number of spiritual points that can be unlocked is different depending on the cultivation technique. Depending on the number of spiritual points that can be unlocked, cultivation techniques are graded into different ranks, which are Heaven, Earth, Black and Yellow. Only Heaven rank cultivation technique can allow the cultivator to unlock 360 spiritual points. For Earth rank cultivation techniques, it's 180 spiritual points and 81 spiritual points for Black rank cultivation techniques. Then, he pointed at the golden liberation technique in his hand. The lowest rank is this kind of yellow rank cultivation technique, and they're the most commonly seen. Upon hearing Elder Tang's explanation, Lu Yi finally had a better understanding of the different ranks. So, this golden liberation technique is just a piece of trash in JoJo. It's no wonder that Manager Yang would bring it with him. Fortunately, he did not take it as some kind of treasure. Otherwise, he would have become a laughingstock. The different ranks of cultivation techniques not only determine the number of spiritual points a cultivator will eventually be able to unlock, but they'll also create a huge difference between the cultivator's powers when they're in the same realm. Also, it'll have a huge impact on a cultivator's future. Are you saying that a cultivator who has cultivated a higher rank cultivation technique will be more powerful and have a brighter future? Lu Yi asked. That's right. Elder Tang nodded. Do you understand the reason behind it? Please enlighten me, Lu Yi uttered humbly. Elder Tang gave it a thought as though he was trying to come up with a clearer explanation, for he hadn't told anyone about it for a long time. A moment later he asked, do you know the different realms? Spirit Creek, Cloud River, Real Lake and Divine Ocean realms, Lu Yi replied. He had heard it from Yu Xiaotaya. What does Spirit Creek mean? Recalling what Yu Xiaotaya had told him, Lu Yi went on to say, to unlock enough spiritual points so that our own spiritual power will be able to flow through the points and form into a cosmic orbit. It's called Spirit Creek Realm because we aim to make our spiritual power flow as smoothly as a creek. That's right. Elder Tang ran his fingers through his beard. How many spiritual points are considered enough then? Lu Yi was unable to answer the question. A smiling Elder Tang pointed at the golden liberation technique in his hand and uttered, if you cultivate this technique, you'll reach First Order Spirit Creek Realm by unlocking 9 spiritual points, then 18 points for the Second Order Realm and 27 points for the Third Order Realm. Lu Yi immediately realized that something was amiss. Aren't there supposed to be 9 orders for Spirit Creek Realm? You'll only be able to reach Third Order Spirit Creek Realm by cultivating a yellow rank cultivation technique, which is why it's the lowest rank. If you cultivate a black rank technique, you'll reach 6th Order Spirit Creek Realm. If you cultivate an Earth rank technique, you'll reach 9th Order Spirit Creek Realm. As for a Heaven rank technique, 12th Order. Lu Yi was shocked as he had never heard of 12th Order Spirit Creek Realm before. Elder Tang shook his head with a smile. It's still 9th Order. A puzzled Lu Yi asked why. Elder Tang explained. That's because different cultivation techniques correspond to different numbers of spiritual points, even in the same realm. For example, by cultivating Golden Liberation Technique, you'll only need to unlock 9 spiritual points to reach First Order Spirit Creek realm. However, if you cultivate a Heaven Rank Cultivation Technique, you'll need to unlock 18 points to reach the same realm. A cultivator who has cultivated an Earth Rank Technique will reach 9th Order Spirit Creek realm by unlocking 180 points. However, for a cultivator who has cultivated a Heaven Rank Technique, he'll only reach 6th Order Spirit Creek realm after unlocking 180 points. Lu Yi could somewhat grasp the idea. You mean if we cultivate a high rank technique, we'll need to unlock more spiritual points to reach the same realm as compared to a lower rank technique? That's right. In that case, we cannot judge how powerful a cultivator is based on the realm he is in, right? A cultivator who had cultivated an Earth rank technique would reach 9th Order Spirit Creek realm after unlocking 180 spiritual points. However, he wouldn't be a match for a 7th Order Spirit Creek realm master who had cultivated a Heaven rank technique, because the latter had unlocked more than 180 points. At that instant, Lu Yi suddenly understood what Elder Tang had told him earlier. In that case, even if 2 people were in the same realm, their powers were not on the same level if their cultivation techniques were of different ranks. The rank of the technique would also affect a cultivator's future. Sect Master, since Heaven rank cultivation techniques are so good, why doesn't everyone cultivate them? What's the point of having Earth, Black and Yellow rank cultivation techniques? Is it very difficult to obtain a Heaven rank technique? A smiling Elder Tang replied, although it's difficult to find a Heaven rank technique, even a rogue cultivator will be able to obtain one if he's determined enough. The reason not everyone is going for Heaven rank techniques is that every cultivator has their limitations when it comes to the number of spiritual points they can unlock. What do you mean? When you're a new cultivator, it's extremely difficult to unlock any spiritual points. However, as your own number of spiritual points and power increase, it'll be much easier for you to unlock the points until you reach your limit. Once the limit has been reached, it'll be difficult for you to unlock more points. So, it'll be pointless even if you have a better technique. It's useless for a cultivator, whose limit is 180 spiritual points, to cultivate a Heaven rank technique. Hence, you have to cultivate according to your own capabilities. I see. Lu Yi finally understood it. Moreover, it's actually better to cultivate a yellow rank technique when you're just starting out, because it's easier. That's right. You'll reach First Order Spirit Creek realm by unlocking 9 spiritual points. However, if you cultivate a Heaven rank technique, you'll need to unlock 18 points. By allowing your spiritual power to pass through your points earlier and becoming a Spirit Creek realm master, you'll be more efficient at cultivating. Hence, be it the rogue cultivators who are without any support or the disciples from the major sects, they'll start with a yellow rank technique. After they cultivate the technique fully, they can still change to another technique. In fact, Elder Tang didn't tell him the whole story regarding changing the cultivation technique. Only those rogue cultivators who didn't have a solid foundation and the disciples from small clans would start with a yellow rank technique. Although there were no drawbacks in changing the cultivation technique, it would still be troublesome. Those with a powerful background would choose to cultivate either a black or earth rank cultivation technique. That was because be it yellow, black or earth rank, a cultivator would only need to unlock 9 points to reach First Order Spirit Creek realm. There was no difference between the 3. A cultivator would only make a shift to Heaven rank technique when necessary after he unlocked all the points and reached his limit. Those who were not capable could only attempt to achieve a breakthrough. However, Elder Tang was concerned that Lu Ye's talent was only 1 leaf, so the latter probably couldn't unlock many spiritual points throughout his life. Therefore, a yellow rank technique was enough for him. Certainly, he did not point it out, nor did he look down on Lu Yi because of that. As a sect master, he did not show any impatience when teaching Lu Yi, who was a disciple on paper. As for your worry that this might be an evil technique, Elder Tang lifted his head and stared solemnly at him. You have to remember that only people can be categorized as good or evil, not a cultivation technique. Whatever the technique, it's for people to cultivate. It is the human heart that makes something good or evil. There are sly people within Grand Sky Coalition, and there are also upright people in Thousand Demon Ridge. I'll remember it, Lu Yi replied respectfully. Humanity's Great Sage. Chapter 23, Spiritual Points Barrier and Residue. Didn't you learn such things from Mystical Sky Sect? During the conversation, Elder Tang realized that Lu Yi knew little about cultivation, which was why he was curious. It was difficult for Lu Yi to tell him the truth, so he replied, I was young and naughty in the past, so I didn't pay attention to the seniors' teachings. A smiling Elder Tang uttered, That's fine. You're still young, so you can start working hard from now on. Yes. Elder Tang lifted his hand and pointed one finger at Lu Ye's abdomen. Your first spiritual point is full now. If you want to unlock the second one, feel it carefully. Upon hearing that, Lu Yi quickly straightened up. Feeling Elder Tang's finger on his abdomen, he realized that an external force was penetrating his body. It was Elder Tang's spiritual power, but it was very gentle, so it wouldn't cause any harm to Lu Yi. The force passed through Lu Ye's sore spiritual point and clustered in a nearby spot. Lu Yi was familiar with the spot as it was the second spiritual point for Golden Liberation Technique. He had failed in his previous attempts to locate it, but Elder Tang was able to find it with ease. It was the benefit of joining a sect and getting some guidance from a senior, which could allow a new cultivator to save a lot of time and energy. The period of time when a cultivator was just starting out was most crucial. If he could unlock more spiritual points quicker than the others, he would be in a more advantageous position. This is the second spiritual point of Golden Liberation Technique. You can try to lead your own spiritual power to this point, Elder Tang uttered. Lu Yi quickly followed the old man's advice and led his ample spiritual power from his source spiritual point to the second one. However, he could clearly feel there was a barrier in front of the point which fended off his spiritual power. Every spiritual point has its own barrier. You can only unlock the point by breaking through the barrier. No one can help you, so you have to give it a try on your own. Given Elder Tang's power, he could easily help Lu Yi shatter the barrier. However, if he really did that, he might cause some irreversible damage to the young man's spiritual point. Hence, he could only help Lu Yi locate the spiritual point but not break the barrier for him. It was the first time Lu Yi learned that there was a barrier in front of every spiritual point. He had managed to unlock Source spiritual point with the help of Skill Tree. Recalling what had happened, he realized that there was indeed something that had broken apart. Now, it seemed that the thing that had been shattered was the barrier. Elder Tang's spiritual power did not remain on the same spot as it went on to flow through Lu Ye's body. It would take a long time to break through a barrier. He had helped Lu Yi locate the second spiritual point, and the rest depended on the latter's hard work. A moment later, he retracted his hand and uttered, I've left some leads in 8 of your spiritual points following Golden Liberation Technique's cultivation route. Every time you unlock a new spiritual point, you'll immediately feel the location of the next one. After you unlock all 8 spiritual points, you should make your spiritual power flow through the source spiritual points and the other 8 points following the cultivation route, and you'll become a Spirit Creek Realm Master. Thanks, Sect Master. Lu Yi saluted him. A smiling Elder Tang replied, Just go on cultivating for now. It'll take some time before we reach Mount Ao. Yes, Lu Yi replied and just continued cultivating on the same spot. Since the Sect Master was right in front of him, he could ask the old man to give him a hand if anything went wrong. After confirming the location of the second spiritual point, Lu Yi became energized as he activated his spiritual power from the source spiritual point and tried to break through the barrier of the second point. He wondered what the barrier was made of. Every time he tried to crush it, he could feel that it would become looser. Nevertheless, it felt terrible trying to shatter the barrier. Every time he hit the barrier with his spiritual power, it felt like his spiritual point was smacked with a hammer. It would still be alright if it was just 1 or 2 times. However, after several attempts, he realized that his second spiritual point felt sore. Furthermore, it would take some spiritual power every time he wanted to shatter the barrier. It was then he understood why the Sect Master said that breaking through barriers was difficult for a new cultivator, but it would become increasingly easier as the cultivator's power increased. If a spiritual point was likened to a bucket, then spiritual power was like the water inside the bucket. Presently, Lu Yi only had a bucket of water. If he had 2 to 3 buckets, he would have more spiritual power to use, and it would significantly increase his speed of breaking through the barrier. He might even be able to achieve it in one go. 1 hour later, he realized that he couldn't mobilize his spiritual power anymore as the water in his bucket had almost dried up. Hence, he took out a bottle of qi blood pills from Zhou Cheng's storage bag and dropped 2 pills on his palm. Did you always use those to assist your cultivation? Elder Tang suddenly asked. Lu Yi quickly replied, yes. His chest tightened when he saw that Elder Tang's expression appeared awkward. Sect Master, is there anything wrong with these qi blood pills? Elder Tang frowned. Did those from Evil Moon Valley tell you they're qi blood pills? Aren't they? Lu Yi was shocked. He had consumed these pills before, and they indeed could help restore his vitality. What were they if they were not qi blood pills? Elder Tang took Zhou Cheng's storage bag and dropped all the bottles on the ground before examining them one by one. Then he passed a bottle to Lu Yi. These are the real qi blood pills. Lu Yi took the bottle to have a look and realized that the spirit pills inside it were indeed different from the ones he had consumed before. He had examined these pills in the past, but since he couldn't recognize what they were, he didn't dare to take them as he pleased. He had never expected that the pills he had been consuming were not qi blood pills. The real ones were in a different bottle. What are these then? Lu Yi pointed at the bottle of pills that he was about to take just now. They're the residue from refining qi blood pills, Elder Tang explained. Not every attempt to refine pills will be successful. If it fails, it'll become residue, which is practically useless. However, some residue still retains some medicinal efficacies. These are the things that are left behind after failed attempts to refine qi blood pills. Lu Ye's expression darkened when he heard Elder Tang's explanation. It was no wonder that he always felt there was a char taste when he consumed these pills in the past. He thought that it was the original taste of qi blood pills, but now it seemed that it wasn't the case. He had been taking the residue from failed attempts to refine pills, which was why it had a strange taste to it. Why did the Evil Moon Valley's cultivators bring this stuff with them? Elder Tang was puzzled. It's for the mining slaves. Lu Yi explained the mechanism of exchanging contributions for rewards in the mine. Upon hearing that, Elder Tang took the residue. You can't have it anymore as it'll affect your cultivation. A nervous Lu Yi asked, how does it affect me? Every drug in the world is slightly poisonous. The spirit pills we use for cultivation contain pill poison as well. The lower quality the pills are, the more poison they contain. In fact, the residue from refining pills is the most poisonous. That's why even though you can rely on spirit pills to help with your cultivation, you can't be overly reliant on them. If you take too many pills, a lot of pill poison will accumulate in your body. The consequences could range from turbid spiritual power and difficulty in using spells to irreversible damage to your foundation and power. Lu Yi was terrified upon hearing that. Previously, he had consumed 200 to 300 pills that were made from the residue. If it was as serious as what Elder Tang had said, he was basically doomed. After a gulp, he asked anxiously, Sect Master, are there any guidelines on the dosage we can refer to when using pills to help with our cultivation? How do we know how much pill poison we've accumulated? Elder Tang replied, just observe your spiritual power. Just like what I had said, when too much pill poison has been accumulated, your spiritual power will become turbid. To a cultivator, the purer his spiritual power is, the easier it is for him to cultivate and battle against other people, and vice versa. I could see that your spiritual power is pretty pure, so you don't have to worry about it. When he helped Lu Yi locate his second spiritual point just now, his spiritual power had passed through Lu Ye's points, so he was clear about whether the latter's spiritual power was pure. Upon hearing that, Lu Yi felt awkward. Humanity's Great Sage, Chapter 24. The Joy of Cultivating Through the Use of Spirit Pills. The sect master might be unaware of Lu Ye's situation, but Lu Yi himself was well aware of his own situation. Putting aside the fact that he had successively redeemed more than 30 of those qi blood pills residue from Manager Yang and consumed them over the past year, he had also consumed about 200 to 300 of those pills in the span of 10 or so days during the period he had spent inside the cave. Under normal circumstances, taking so much residue into his body would surely have caused great hidden dangers to himself. So, why did the sect master claim that his spiritual power was still fairly pure? On the other hand, the sect master couldn't have been mistaken about something like this. Lu Yi might not know how high his cultivation was, but he was a 9th rank sect master. He should be in the Cloud River realm at the very least. In other words, there really was nothing wrong with Lu Ye's spiritual power. But how was that possible? The first thing that came to mind was the skill tree. Even when Lu Yi had been in the mines, he had the vague feeling that the skill tree wasn't something as simple as the host for the spiritual patterns. It would now seem that the purity of his spiritual power was also related to the skill tree. There was simply no other explanation for the current situation otherwise. Unfortunately, this wasn't something he could tell the sect master so easily. After considering it for a bit, he asked, "Sect master, how do you cure a person who has accumulated too much pill poison in their bodies and caused their spiritual power to become clouded as a result?" Naturally, they have to stop cultivating and slowly remove the pill poison from their bodies. This process will take a very long time to complete. Therefore, an excessive reliance on spirit pills during cultivation will not increase your cultivation speed. On the contrary, it will have the opposite effect. But you don't have to worry. Appropriate use of the spirit pills as a supplement is not a problem. The key is moderation and knowing your limits. I understand. Your cultivation is still fairly shallow at this moment, so it is understandable for you to borrow the help of spirit pills to aid your cultivation. But why aren't you using the spirit restoring pills when you already have them? Why do you choose to use the Qi blood pills to refine your vitality into Qi instead? You must know that even though both spirit pills can assist you in your cultivation, the latter's main function is to replenish one's Qi and blood, as well as consolidate one's energy. He was surprised. I can't tell which are the spirit-restoring pills. He had taken out the Qi blood pills to consume them out of habit. All he wanted was to recover his spirit energy as soon as possible to break through the barrier of his spiritual point. He had not thought much about what he was doing. Elder Tang burst into a peal of laughter before pushing a bottle over to Lu Yi. This bottle contains the spirit-restoring pills. Although these are the lowest-ranked spirit-restoring pills and their quality is poor, it's just right for your use. Lu Yi tipped a single pill from the bottle and studied the appearance of the spirit-restoring pill carefully. As I expected, Manager Yang had some spirit-restoring pills in his possession. I've seen something similar in his storage bag. It's just that I didn't dare to consume them lightly. Now that he had the sect master's guidance, he confidently swallowed the spirit-restoring pill in his hand and calmly refined it. After consuming the spirit pill, you need to guide the pill power so that it doesn't remain stagnant and cause complications down the road. The sect master's voice rang in his ears. This was the reason why the sect master had said that the lowest-ranked spirit-restoring pill was just right for his use. With his cultivation of only one spiritual point, he would not be able to guide the dense power of the pill power in time if he had consumed a better quality spirit pill. Once too much pill power had been accumulated in his body, it would have a huge negative impact on his cultivation. After listening to the sect master's teachings, he did as he was told. A warmth slowly seeped out of his lower abdomen. It was the pill power of the spirit-restoring pill being released and converted into the spiritual power used by cultivators. Following his guidance, the spiritual power converted from the pill power slowly poured into his source spiritual point. His source spiritual point, which had almost dried up completely, gradually filled up again. The medicinal efficacy of the spirit-restoring pill was incomparably better than the residue of the Qi blood pills that he had been consuming before. In the first place, spirit-restoring pills were more suitable for cultivation than Qi blood pills. Moreover, what he previously consumed was the residue formed from the failed attempts of Evil Moon Valley's cultivators in refining spirit pills. It had required a process of refining his vitality into Qi to transform his vitality into spiritual power. Therefore, it was only natural that it was utterly incomparable to what he was experiencing now. It wasn't until this moment that he truly realized the joy of cultivating through the use of spirit pills. His nearly dried-out source spiritual point was filled to the brim again in less than half a day, but the pill power of the spirit-restoring pill was still in effect. Thus, he hurriedly guided the spiritual power in his source spiritual point to charge at the barriers of his second spiritual point repeatedly. At one point, He vaguely felt as though something inside his body had broken and the spiritual power that had been blocked before suddenly flowed onward without any hindrance. His second spiritual point had been unlocked. The spiritual power brimming in his source spiritual point gently flowed into his second spiritual point, which gave him a very comfortable feeling. Be that as it may, some of the spirit-restoring pill's medicinal efficacy still remained. A very long time passed before he sensed that the medicinal efficacy of the spirit-restoring pill was completely consumed. Only then did he open his eyes again. He was about to report his achievement to the sect master when he realized that the sect master was nowhere to be seen. The sect master had left at some unknown point in time. Nevertheless, Lu Yi wasn't too bothered by the sect master's departure. The sect master was a sect master after all. He would surely be busy with his own affairs. Besides, he had already helped Lu Yi locate the positions of the next few spiritual points. All that came afterward was for Lu Yi to follow the steps he was taught and work hard in his cultivation. Lu Yi's goal was to unlock his spiritual points according to the training course laid out by the cultivation method as soon as possible. After all, he could only be regarded as a proper cultivator once he unlocked those spiritual points with his spiritual power and reached the Spirit Creek realm. He also intended to test whether his previous conjecture regarding the skill tree was correct. Thus, he did not stop to rest as he took out another spirit-restoring pill and consumed it. The dense pill power was converted into spiritual power, which filled his spiritual points under his guidance. 2 days later, he had consumed almost 6 spirit-restoring pills and filled his second spiritual point to the brim. He was startled by the speed. It had taken him more than 10 days just to fill up his first spiritual point when he first achieved enlightenment. However, the same process now only took 2 days to complete. The gap was simply too wide. It could be seen that the medicinal efficacies of the spirit-restoring pills were truly nothing like those residues, even if it was only the lowest quality spirit-restoring pill. He suddenly thought of Yu Xiaotaya. At the time, Yu Xiaotaya had told him that she had spent more than 20 days to fill up her first spiritual point when she first achieved enlightenment. In addition, she had consumed a spirit-restoring pill at the time. It was something a cultivator of Evil Moon Valley had given to her. In comparison, his cultivation speed was clearly abnormal. What he could be certain of was that it had something to do with the skill tree. Unfortunately, he had no means of figuring out what the exact connection between the two was at the moment. In any case, it was a good thing for him. He could probably unearth the secrets of the skill tree once his cultivation foundation had gotten much stronger in the future. The sect master did not reappear again. Meanwhile, Lu Yi had already cultivated for 2 days. He was not tired, but he was starving. Ever since he achieved enlightenment, his appetite had grown. He had already noticed this point when he had been in the mines. It was just that having a good appetite at his age was a good thing. The more he ate, the more vitality he would have. It wasn't convenient for him to leave in search of food. Fortunately, Zhou Cheng's storage bag still contained some food. He was not too picky about what he ate, so he took them out and ate them with some clean water to wash it down. After he had his fill of food and drink, he continued cultivating. He broke through the barrier of his third spiritual point half a day later. 2 more days after that, he filled his third spiritual point to the brim. The entire process consumed 6 spirit-restoring pills just like before. Although he wanted to continue cultivating, he was struck by a wave of drowsiness the moment he relaxed his mind. He knew that he had been cultivating for too long. He had no choice but to rest for now. Taking out some bedding from the storage bag, he lay down to sleep and soon fell asleep.